Hello and welcome to this long, relaxing journey through the peaceful worlds of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan. If you enjoy deep, slow, immersive history told as a continuous story, feel free to subscribe or follow for more long history videos like this one. Now let us begin. Long before written records were kept on the archipelago, long before emperors and courts and chronicles, the islands that would one day be called Japan were shaped by quiet rhythms of sea and forest. The story begins in an age far removed from the noise of kingdoms, a time when people lived close to the land and to the long turning of the seasons. The Jōmon world was not an empire or a nation. It was a landscape of scattered communities tied together not by kings or conquests, but by traditions carried in memory, in craft, in the patterns of life passed gently from one generation to the next. Imagine the shoreline thousands of years ago. The sea was higher than it would be in later eras, lapping at coves where dense forests reached almost to the water's edge. Summer heat shimmered across inlets rich with fish and shellfish, and the deep green mountains were alive with animals that provided meat, tools, and clothing. The people who lived here built their lives around these natural offerings. Their earliest settlements were places shaped less by permanent architecture and more by the rhythm of movement, returning year after year to the same fertile spots where nuts fell, fish spawned, and the land welcomed them like an old friend. Over centuries, these patterns grew into more settled communities, and the people began to craft pottery unlike anything seen elsewhere in the world at that time. Their pottery carried the impressions of cords pressed into wet clay, creating swirling designs that seemed to echo the curves of waves, winds, and roots. These vessels were more than simple containers. They were symbols of identity, reminders of the hands that shaped them and the stories they carried. The Jōmon people did not write their history in ink, but they left it in clay, in earth, and in the quiet continuity of life lived close to nature. Their homes, often built in shallow pits dug into the ground, were warm refuges against the elements. Each dwelling formed part of a small cluster arranged around an open space where daily life unfolded. Children played while adults wove baskets, prepared food, and shaped tools from stone, bone, and antler. The air carried the earthy scent of wood smoke, and the sound of the sea was never far away. In this peaceful setting, generations grew up listening to the stories of ancestors and learning the skills that kept their communities strong. Food was a constant thread linking the people to their environment. The forests provided chestnuts, acorns, and walnuts, which were gathered in great quantities during the cool months. These nuts were dried and stored, offering sustenance through the winter. From the sea came fish, shellfish, and seaweed. Rivers brought salmon that returned each year, a dependable source of nourishment that shaped seasonal routines. The people developed intricate knowledge of how the animals moved, how the trees bore fruit, and how the tides shifted. Their survival depended on understanding these patterns, and over time that understanding became a form of wisdom passed down with quiet care. Although the Jōmon world is often described as peaceful, it was not untouched by change. Climate shifts altered coastlines and forests. Communities adapted, sometimes moving to new areas, sometimes expanding old ones. Yet the transitions were gradual, unfolding over centuries, giving the people time to adjust their lives without sudden upheaval. Their story was one of endurance rather than conquest, of patience rather than ambition for borders or wealth. Spiritual life flowed through their daily activities. They created small clay figurines whose purpose is still debated, but many believe they held ritual significance, perhaps connected to fertility, protection, or the mysteries of life and death. Whatever their meaning, the figurines reflect a worldview in which the natural and the spiritual were not separate realms, but parts of a unified whole. The landscape itself held meaning. Mountains, rivers, and forests were alive in ways that shaped the people's sense of belonging. As the millennia passed, these communities continued to evolve. Some grew larger, forming rings of houses arranged around central spaces that may have served as gathering places. Trade networks stretched across regions, carrying obsidian, amber, and crafted goods. Even without writing, these networks conveyed ideas and styles, linking distant groups through shared practices and exchanged materials. The world was still quiet compared to later eras, but it was interconnected in its own subtle way. The story of the Jōmon era is not a tale of sudden revolutions, but one of slow transformation. Yet even slow transformations carry momentum, and by the end of the long Jōmon period, the island stood at the threshold of change. New technologies and new ways of living began to arrive from the Asian continent. These developments would gradually reshape the archipelago and give rise to what we now call the Yayoi world, a world marked by agriculture, metal tools, and more permanent settlements. But before that transformation fully unfolded, the Jōmon legacy had already become deeply rooted, forming a foundation on which later cultures would build. The transition from one era to another did not happen overnight. For a time, the two worlds coexisted. Some communities embraced the new methods of growing rice in wet fields, while others continued the old ways of hunting, gathering, and crafting as their ancestors had done. This coexistence created a landscape where different rhythms of life blended and influenced one another, shaping the evolving society in ways both subtle and profound. The changes that began to take shape across the islands created new patterns of life that would eventually define the Yayoi era. Yet at first these changes were slow and gentle, like ripples spreading outward across a quiet inlet. The arrival of rice cultivation did not erase the Jōmon world. Instead, it layered itself upon older traditions, weaving new possibilities into the familiar landscapes of forest, river, and shore. The communities that first adopted rice farming did so because they saw in it a way to bring greater security and stability to their lives. Rice, when tended carefully and stored properly, could feed many people through difficult seasons. But adopting this crop required learning a new relationship with the land, one based not only on gathering and hunting, but on shaping water, soil, and time itself. The earliest farmers began by clearing small plots in low-lying basins where water could be directed and controlled. These wetlands, once home to reeds and marsh plants, were gradually transformed into paddies. The work was meticulous. People carved channels, built earthen embankments, and smoothed the soil to allow water to flow evenly. As the first plants sprouted, the newcomers observed the delicate balance needed to keep the fields thriving. Too much water drowned the seedlings. Too little left them brittle and starved. Through careful experimentation, they learned to read the subtle signs of the plants and adjust their methods as needed. This close attention mirrored the relationship Jōmon communities had long held with the forests and rivers, but now it took shape in a more deliberate form, one that required planning, cooperation, and coordinated labor. In the early centuries of this transition, these rice farmers lived alongside communities who continued the Jōmon lifeways. There were places where the sound of pounding grain from newly harvested rice mixed with the familiar rhythms of shellfish gathering and nut processing. The two worlds existed in a patchwork that reflected the diversity of the archipelago. Some regions favored agriculture because the terrain was suitable and the climate stable. Others held to older patterns because the forests remained generous and the coastline abundant. Over time, however, rice cultivation proved so reliable and effective that it gradually spread. The knowledge traveled from village to village through trade, through marriage alliances, and through the movement of families seeking new opportunities. As rice farming became more widespread, new tools appeared in daily life. Bronze and later iron made their way into the hands of skilled craftspeople. At first, these metals were precious and rare, traded over long distances and carefully guarded. Eventually, as knowledge spread, local production increased. Metal tools allowed people to clear land more efficiently, shaping larger fields and building more durable structures. These tools also changed the way people hunted, fished, and interacted with their environment. The quiet forests that once echoed only with stone and wooden implements now heard the sharper tones of metal striking against wood and earth. Yet the adoption of metal did not erase the artistry of earlier crafts. Potters continued to shape vessels, though their designs evolved to fit new needs. Basket makers wove containers for storing grain. Artisans experimented with ornaments and tools that blended old knowledge with new techniques. Settlements grew in size as agriculture supported larger populations. Houses became more substantial, often raised on stilts to protect stored grains from pests and moisture. Villages expanded around central open areas, and some developed defensive features such as moats or earthen ramparts. These defenses were not necessarily signs of constant conflict, but rather precautions taken by communities that had begun to accumulate valuable resources. Grain, metal, and crafted goods represented wealth, and people took steps to protect what they had worked so hard to produce. Even so, the rhythm of daily life in these villages was marked more by cooperation than by strife. Farming required communal effort. Channels had to be cleared. Embankments had to be maintained. Harvests had to be gathered at the right moment. People worked side by side, strengthening social ties that held the community together through both abundance and hardship. As villages grew and became more interconnected, cultural practices evolved. Rituals associated with planting and harvesting emerged, reflecting the new central role of agriculture in sustaining life. Festivals marked the turning of seasons, bringing people together to honor the spirits of the land and the ancestors who had laid the foundations for their way of life. These rituals did not replace older spiritual traditions, but blended with them, creating a dynamic cultural landscape in which Jōmon beliefs intertwined with new Yayoi customs. The figurines that once represented mysteries of the Jōmon cosmos now existed alongside new symbols that reflected the values of a farming society. The landscape itself transformed under Yayoi practices. Fields spread across valleys that had once been quiet wetlands. Villages clustered near these fertile areas, forming networks of settlements that shared resources and information. Roads and paths emerged from the repeated movement of people carrying tools, goods, and stories from one place to another. Rivers remained vital arteries of travel, allowing communities to exchange their harvests, pottery, and crafted items. Boats of varying sizes moved along these waterways, connecting distant regions and enabling the flow of new ideas. Despite these broad changes, the Yayoi world remained peaceful for long stretches of time. The work of farming demanded patience and care rather than aggression. Communities were more focused on securing good harvest than on expanding territory. Even the presence of defensive structures does not necessarily indicate a violent age, but reflects prudence in guarding resources. Archaeological evidence suggests that while conflicts did occur, they were not the central defining feature of Yayoi society. Instead, cooperation and shared labor shaped daily life, much as in the Jōmon world before it. Over generations, the balance between hunting, gathering, and farming continued to shift. The forests still provided game and nuts, and the seas remained rich with fish, but rice became the staple food that anchored the diet of many communities. This shift affected social organization. People began to rely more on stored food, which required planning for winter months and keeping track of supplies. Those who managed storage and distribution became important figures within their communities, and over time, certain families or leaders gained influence by overseeing agricultural cycles and communal resources. Yet even this emerging hierarchy was modest compared to the rigid structures that would appear in later Japanese history. The Yayoi world was still rooted in cooperation and shared responsibilities. As agricultural knowledge spread, so did the desire to improve and expand fields. Communities worked together to develop new methods for managing water and soil. They observed how rainfall patterns changed throughout the year and designed systems that allowed them to store water during dry periods. They learned to rotate crops, experiment with plant varieties, and read the subtle cues of soil health. These practices required keen observation and patient experimentation, skills already honed by thousands of years of Jōmon adaptation to a changing environment. In this sense, the Yayoi advances were not a rejection of the past, but a continuation of the deep relationship the people had always held with the land. Beyond agriculture, Yayoi society developed rich social and cultural life. Music, dance, and communal gatherings played important roles in strengthening bonds between people. The sound of drums carried across the fields during festivals, echoing the heartbeat of a community united in purpose and celebration. Instruments crafted from wood and metal added new layers to musical traditions. People gathered in open spaces to share stories, honor ancestors, and mark transitions such as births, marriages, and seasonal milestones. These gatherings were moments of joy and reflection, times when the work of farming paused and the community embraced its shared identity. Trade continued to expand during this period. People exchanged rice for goods from distant regions, including metals, ornaments, and specialized tools. These exchanges created networks of interaction that linked the archipelago with the wider world beyond the sea. Through trade, the Yayoi, people learned of new ways to shape metal, new forms of pottery, and new styles of ornamentation. Yet they adapted these influences according to their own needs and tastes. The result was a culture that was both open to innovation and deeply rooted in its own traditions. The transition from Jōmon to Yayoi life also brought changes in how people understood their place in the world. The act of cultivating rice required a mindset focused on future outcomes. Seeds planted in spring did not yield food until many months later. This long interval between labor and reward encouraged planning, patience, and a sense of responsibility toward future generations. These values gradually permeated the culture, influencing how people approached leadership, cooperation, and community identity. The natural world remained central to their worldview, but now the emphasis included both reverence for nature and the ability to shape it in sustainable ways. Families played an essential role in passing down knowledge. Children grew up watching their parents work the fields, learning when to plant, how to manage water, and how to store grain. They also absorbed stories of the Jōmon ancestors whose ways still shaped aspects of daily life. In this way, the memory of the past remained alive even as the present changed. Elders guided younger generations not only with practical instruction, but with wisdom gained from decades of observing the land. Their understanding of nature's cycles, weather patterns, and spiritual traditions ensured that the community remained connected to its roots. As centuries passed, the Yayoi world became increasingly complex. Some communities grew large enough to be considered early towns, with central areas devoted to gathering and storage. These larger settlements often served as hubs for surrounding villages, coordinating festivals, trade, and shared labor projects. Leaders emerged who oversaw these activities, but their authority rested more on respect and practical skill than on force. Their primary task was to ensure the well-being of their people by organizing work, maintaining peace, and upholding traditions that balanced individual and communal needs. Although the Yayoi world was more structured than the Jōmon era, it still retained a sense of balance and harmony. The expansion of farming did not eliminate the forests, but existed alongside them. People continued to hunt, gather, and fish, maintaining a diversified way of life that reduced the risk of depending on a single source of food. The sea remained a constant presence, providing both nourishment and pathways for travel. The mountains, with their dense forests and hidden valleys, remained places of spiritual significance. They were the domains of deities and ancestors, places where people sought guidance, healing, or simply a deeper connection with the world around them. Rituals grew in importance as communities sought to ensure favorable harvests. Offerings were made to spirits associated with water, fertility, and the cycles of growth. These ceremonies brought people together at key moments of the agricultural calendar, reinforcing social bonds and strengthening the sense of continuity between past, present, and future. The quiet reverence that characterized these rituals echoed the deeper cultural heritage that had always guided the people of the archipelago. In their ceremonies, one could still sense the spirit of the Jōmon ancestors, whose connection to nature remained an enduring presence. As the Yayoi period progressed, its communities continued to innovate. Techniques for managing larger fields improved, tools became more refined, metalworking expanded, producing ornaments and weapons that reflected both artistic skill and practical needs. Yet despite these advancements, the Yayoi world remained far more peaceful than the feudal eras that would come later. Its social structures were flexible, its leaders focused on cooperation, and its values centered on harmony with the land. Conflicts did occur, as they do in all human societies, but they were not the foundation of Yayoi life. Instead, the people devoted their energies to building stable communities, nurturing crops, and cultivating relationships that ensured mutual support. In these villages, life unfolded with a steady rhythm. Morning light signaled the start of work in the fields. Children tended smaller tasks while adults performed the demanding labor of managing water and soil. As the sun reached its height, people rested briefly, sharing simple meals of rice, fish, vegetables, and nuts. In the late afternoon, they returned to their tasks until the shadows grew long. Evenings brought relaxation as families gathered around small hearths to eat, talk, and share stories. The scent of cooked rice mingled with the aroma of seafood and forest herbs, creating a sense of comfort that anchored each day. The changing seasons brought shifting activities. Spring was a time of planting and celebration, a season filled with hope and anticipation. Summer demanded constant attention to the fields, ensuring that water levels remained balanced. Autumn brought the harvest, a moment of joy and relief as the results of months of labor were gathered. Winter, though quiet in the fields, was a time for repairing tools, weaving baskets, and strengthening community ties through shared gatherings. These cycles shaped the rhythm of life so thoroughly that people felt connected not only to the land, but to time itself. The peaceful worlds of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan were marked by continuity as much as change. The Jōmon legacy lived on in the deep respect for nature, the value placed on community, and the quiet rituals that honored the unseen forces of the world. The Yayoi innovations added new layers of complexity, enabling larger populations, stable food supplies, and more interconnected cultures. Together, they formed a long span of prehistory characterized by balance rather than turmoil, evolution rather than disruption. The growing interconnectedness of Yayoi communities created subtle shifts in how people understood power, responsibility, and identity. As villages expanded and agricultural productivity increased, certain individuals and families became central to organizing communal labor and managing resources. Their roles grew naturally from practical needs. Someone had to coordinate the timing of planting across fields that shared the same water channels. Someone had to oversee the construction and repair of embankments. Someone needed to ensure that stored grain was protected from spoilage, and that every family had access to food during difficult seasons. These responsibilities required wisdom, experience, and trust. Leadership emerged from service rather than dominance, shaped by the rhythms of shared labor and common purpose. Yet even as these early leaders guided their communities, they remained firmly rooted in daily life. They worked alongside their neighbors in the fields, participated in rituals, and relied on the same natural cycles that shaped everyone else's lives. Their influence was not absolute. Decisions were made through discussion, consensus, and tradition. This gentle leadership reflected the character of Yayoi society, which valued balance and stability. The fields needed harmony, and so did the people who tended them. As agricultural practices spread further, some regions developed increasingly sophisticated systems of water control. Communities constructed long channels that connected multiple fields, allowing them to regulate water with remarkable precision. These networks required ongoing cooperation between villages. A drought in one area meant neighboring communities needed to share water. A flood in another area required coordinated efforts to repair embankments. These shared challenges strengthened inter-village bonds, encouraging peaceful relations and mutual support. The web of connections became a defining feature of Yayoi life, spreading knowledge, fostering resilience, and guiding the development of more complex social structures. Music and ritual also evolved to reflect the new rhythms of society. People gathered during planting and harvest seasons to offer thanks and seek blessings. Drums and flutes filled the air with patterns meant to echo the pulse of growing rice and the flow of water. These musical traditions carried emotional weight, linking the practical work of agriculture with the spiritual forces believed to govern nature. The line between daily labor and sacred practice blurred, creating a worldview in which every action held meaning. Children in Yayoi communities grew up immersed in these sounds and practices. They learned the melodies associated with different seasons. They observed how their elders performed rituals with careful gestures that honored ancestors and spirits. These early lessons shaped their understanding of the world, forming a cultural foundation that would support them throughout their lives. They learned that their survival depended not on individual achievement, but on cooperation, respect for nature, and patience. These values extended to interactions with the land itself. Farmers did not seek to dominate or overwhelm the environment. Instead, they worked with natural patterns, adjusting their techniques according to the behavior of water, soil, and climate. They observed how rainfall varied from year to year and modified their fields to prevent erosion. They recognized the importance of fallow periods, allowing soil to recover and maintain fertility. This sustainable approach ensured that the land remained productive for generations, preserving the delicate balance between human needs and natural cycles. The forests that surrounded Yayoi fields remained vital to community life. Hunting continued to provide meat, hides, and bones for tools. Gathering remained an important supplement to agricultural production, especially in times when harvests were less abundant. The variety of food sources helped stabilize the diet and protected communities from relying too heavily on a single crop. This blend of old and new practices allowed Yayoi society to thrive, while maintaining continuity with its Jōmon heritage. In many ways, the Yayoi world represented a blending of identities rather than a replacement of one culture with another. Archaeological evidence suggests that populations of Jōmon origin continue to live across many regions, intermingling with new arrivals from the continent. Over time, these groups exchanged knowledge, formed families, and developed shared practices. The resulting culture was neither entirely Jōmon nor entirely foreign, but a unique blend shaped by the natural landscape of the archipelago. This blending created a rich tapestry of traditions, languages, and customs that laid the groundwork for later Japanese culture. As communities became larger and more interconnected, they developed new forms of craftsmanship. Metalworking advanced significantly. Bronze was shaped into tools, ornaments, and religious objects. Later, the use of iron spread, transforming the efficiency of farming and woodworking. These metals also held symbolic value. Ornaments made of bronze or iron were treasured items passed down through generations, signifying both craftsmanship and cultural identity. Pottery evolved as well, with smoother surfaces and shapes designed to suit the needs of an agricultural society. Large storage vessels became essential for holding grains, while smaller vessels served domestic and ritual purposes. Trade played an increasingly central role in Yayoi society. People traveled along rivers and coastal routes to exchange goods, ideas, and stories. Boats carved from large logs carried passengers and cargo between settlements. Trade networks extended across the archipelago, linking distant regions with surprising efficiency. Through these networks, communities gained access to materials they could not produce locally. Obsidian, amber, metal ores, and crafted ornaments moved from one region to another, creating a sense of shared cultural identity that transcended local boundaries. Despite growing complexity, the Yayoi world retained a deep sense of peace. There were instances of conflict, but these were often limited in scale and duration. The need to maintain shared water systems encouraged diplomacy and cooperation rather than warfare. Leaders understood that conflict disrupted agricultural cycles and threatened the well-being of their communities. As a result, negotiations were often preferred over violence. Rituals and gatherings helped resolve tensions, reinforcing bonds between villages and maintaining social harmony. The social organization of Yayoi communities continued to evolve. Some leaders began to oversee not just individual villages, but larger groups of settlements. These leaders played important roles in coordinating large-scale projects such as irrigation networks or defensive structures. Their influence grew gradually, shaped by the trust and respect of the people they served. Yet even as power became more centralized in certain regions, the essential nature of leadership remained rooted in responsibility rather than authority. A leader's success was measured by the prosperity and unity of the community rather than by personal wealth or status. The construction of large communal structures became more common as societies grew. Raised floor storehouses stood as prominent features of many villages, protecting valuable grain from moisture and pests. These structures represented more than practical solutions. They symbolized the community's collective efforts and shared future. People knew that the grain stored within those walls was the product of countless hours of labor, cooperation, and trust. Through these storehouses, communities ensured their survival, especially during harsh winters or unexpected shortages. Across the changing landscape, families continued to form the foundation of everyday life. Extended families often lived together, sharing responsibilities and supporting one another. Elders played an especially important role, passing down knowledge, mediating disputes, and guiding cultural practices. Their wisdom, drawn from decades of experience, shaped decisions both large and small. In turn, younger generations cared for elders with respect and devotion, recognizing the essential role they played in preserving tradition. Over time, burial practices evolved to reflect shifts in social structure and cultural values. Some individuals were buried with ornaments or tools that indicated their roles within the community. These items offered subtle clues about Yayoi beliefs regarding death and the afterlife. The care taken with burials suggests that people valued remembrance and honored those who came before them. These practices continued the deep Jōmon tradition of respecting ancestors, while adapting to new forms of social organization. Even with expanding populations and growing complexity, everyday life in the Yayoi world remained grounded in simple routines. People woke with the sun, carrying tools made by their own hands or by skilled artisans in nearby villages. They walked familiar paths worn smooth by generations of footsteps. They shared meals of rice, fish, vegetables, and preserved foods. At night they gathered around hearth fires, telling stories that wove together the past and present. These stories reinforced community identity and gave meaning to daily life. Seasonal festivals offered moments of joy and reflection. Planting festivals celebrated new beginnings, while harvest festivals honored the fruits of labor and the generosity of the land. Music, dance, and shared meals brought the community together, strengthening bonds and reaffirming the values that sustained their society. These gatherings were not merely celebrations, but important cultural events that linked people to their ancestors and the natural world. The natural environment continued to shape the way people lived, thought, and related to one another. The sea, always present along the coasts, provided food and transportation. It also held spiritual significance. The mountains, rising in deep green ridges across the archipelago, were seen as places where spirits and ancestors dwelled. Rivers, winding through fields and forests, carried both physical nourishment and symbolic meaning. This intimate connection to nature influenced not only daily life, but the broader worldview of the Yayoi people. In many ways, the Yayoi era represented a long period of balance. Communities grew but did not overwhelm the land. Technology advanced but did not erase older traditions. Social structures evolved but maintained cooperation as a central value. This delicate balance allowed the Yayoi world to flourish peacefully for centuries. The peaceful worlds of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan continued to unfold across centuries, shaped by quiet rhythms that defined both the land and the people who lived upon it. As communities grew more stable and agricultural systems matured, the relationship between humans and their environment reached deeper levels of harmony. The forests, rivers, and coastlines that had sustained Jōmon communities for millennia now supported a new way of life, one that wove together ancient wisdom with the steady confidence of rice cultivation. This blending created a landscape filled with calm continuity, where each generation built upon the foundations of those who came before, carrying forward traditions that honored the spirit of the land. As the agricultural cycle became the heartbeat of daily existence, villages developed a deeper sense of connection to the seasons. Spring was filled with the promise of renewal. Families worked together to prepare fields, repairing embankments, clearing debris, and coaxing water into carefully shaped channels. The sight of young rice plants emerging in neat rows brought a quiet joy that echoed throughout the community. It reminded everyone that the land responded generously to patient care. This responsiveness created a sense of partnership between people and nature. They believed the spirits of the earth, water, and sky watched over the fields, guiding the growth of the crops and ensuring the well-being of the village. Summer brought warmth and abundant life. The fields shimmered under long hours of sunlight. Water moved gently between paddies, carrying reflections of drifting clouds. From morning until evening, people tended their crops with steady dedication. The children watched the adults and learned through participation, gaining the practical skills that would one day sustain their own families. The forests surrounding the fields remained alive with movement and sound. Birds watched from branches, animals foraged among trees, and streams flowed with quiet persistence. These natural elements served as reminders that the world beyond the fields continued to thrive as it had since the days of their Jōmon ancestors. Autumn was the most celebrated season of the year. The ripened rice, heavy with grain, reflected golden light across the landscape. Communities gathered for the harvest, working together in coordinated harmony. Each family contributed to the task, and each family's success was shared by all. Songs accompanied the work, echoing across the fields like gentle affirmations of gratitude. When the final bundles were carried to the raised floor storehouses, a sense of fulfillment settled over the village. Evenings were warmed by communal feasts in which people celebrated their shared labor and honored the spirits who had blessed the harvest. These gatherings offered time for reflection, storytelling, and reaffirmation of cultural identity. Winter brought quietude. The fields rested beneath a blanket of frost, and the forests grew still. With agricultural work paused, families turned to crafting, repairing tools, weaving fabrics, and preparing for the next cycle. Elders told stories that reached back across centuries, recounting the lives of ancestors, the origins of customs, and the mysteries of the land and sky. Children listened with wide eyes, knowing that they were inheritors of a lineage that stretched deep into prehistory. The peaceful atmosphere of winter encouraged contemplation, reinforcing the values of patience and endurance that define the cultural heritage of both Jōmon and Yayoi societies. This enduring sense of calm was deeply rooted in the physical landscape of the Japanese archipelago. The islands offered varied environments, from coastal plains to mountain valleys, each with its own patterns of weather and vegetation. The diversity of landscapes encouraged diverse lifestyles, blending agricultural practices with fishing, hunting, and gathering. These multiple sources of food ensured resilience during years when one resource might be less abundant. The natural balance, maintained across generations, contributed to the long-lasting peace that characterized the era. In many villages, the influence of Jōmon craftsmanship remained visible. Pottery designs continued to evolve but retained echoes of earlier traditions. The intricate cord-marked patterns that defined Jōmon pots gave way to smoother forms, yet the spirit of artistry persisted. Many households preserved older vessels as cherished heirlooms, passing them down as reminders of ancestral ingenuity. The clay itself held memories of hands that had shaped it long before the first rice paddies appeared on the landscape. These pieces of pottery served as silent testimonies to the continuity between past and present. The forests also continued to serve as places of spiritual significance. Sacred groves, where trees grew undisturbed, were believed to be inhabited by deities and ancestral spirits. People visited these groves to offer prayers for protection, guidance, and good harvests. Rituals performed in these natural sanctuaries often echoed the deep reverence for nature that originated in the Jōmon worldview. The line between physical and spiritual worlds remained permeable, shaped by the belief that humans existed within a larger network of beings and forces that sustained life. As Yayoi society matured, trade networks expanded further, linking not just villages within regions but connecting distant parts of the archipelago. These networks allowed goods, stories, and knowledge to flow freely. Boats traveled along coastal routes, carrying rice, tools, ornaments, and pottery to communities far from their place of origin. These exchanges helped unify the islands in subtle but significant ways. While each region maintained its own traditions and local customs, a shared sense of identity gradually emerged, shaped by cooperation and cultural blending. The theme of peace that colored both the Jōmon and Yayoi worlds was not merely the absence of conflict. It was a way of life formed through interdependence, respect for nature, and deep continuity. The people understood that survival depended on harmony, harmony within the community, harmony with ancestors, and harmony with the natural world. This understanding became the philosophical underpinning of their culture, manifesting in rituals, architecture, music, and daily habits. Even when occasional disputes arose between communities, they were often resolved through negotiation, shared labor projects, or symbolic rituals that reaffirmed unity. Leaders took on the role of mediators, guiding communities toward consensus. Their authority stemmed not from coercion but from trust. This trust was built through generations of consistent service, wise judgment, and visible dedication to communal welfare. Over time, burial mounds began to appear in some regions, signaling emerging social distinctions. Yet even these developments were shaped by the peaceful ethos of Yayoi society. Burial sites were places of reverence, carefully constructed to honor individuals who had contributed to the community's well-being. Grave goods reflected personal roles, such as tools for farmers, ornaments for artisans, or ritual items for spiritual guides. These offerings were not displays of wealth, but symbols of identity and remembrance. They served as bridges between the living and the dead, reinforcing the belief that ancestors continued to influence and protect their descendants. The slow rise of larger settlements marked another quiet transformation. Some villages grew into regional centers where skilled artisans, influential leaders, and long-distance traders gathered. These centers became hubs of cultural exchange, drawing people from surrounding areas. Markets emerged where goods were traded, stories were shared, and innovations were passed along. Yet even as these centers grew in prominence, they remained integrated into the peaceful networks that defined Yayoi life. Their purpose was not domination but collaboration, ensuring that surrounding villages benefited from shared knowledge and resources. As centuries passed, the blending of Jōmon and Yayoi traditions created a distinctive cultural landscape characterized by subtlety, cooperation, and resilience. This world was not shaped by sudden conquests or dramatic upheavals, but by gradual evolution. Its transformations were like the turning of seasons, predictable, gentle, and deeply interconnected with the natural environment. The people of this era developed skills and beliefs that would eventually influence the foundations of later Japanese culture, including reverence for nature, communal harmony, respect for ancestors, and the importance of seasonal cycles. While later periods of Japanese history would introduce new forms of government, religion, and social organization, the core values established during the Jōmon and Yayoi worlds remained embedded in cultural memory. The calm dignity of these ancient communities laid the groundwork for future structures, shaping the spiritual and philosophical identity of the archipelago. Their legacy continued to resonate in rituals that honored nature, in agricultural practices that respected the land, and in social customs that emphasized cooperation. As we reflect on these peaceful worlds, it becomes clear why the theme of a relaxing history fits so naturally with the story of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan. The quiet pace of daily life, the harmonious relationship with nature, and the gentle progression of cultural change create a narrative that invites calm contemplation. The land itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with its people, offering abundance to those who treated it with care. Their lives were shaped not by conquest but by connection, not by ambition but by reverence. The peaceful worlds of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan endure in the archaeological record, in enduring cultural traditions, and in the landscapes that still carry traces of ancient fields and settlements. Their story is not one of forgotten simplicity, but of enduring wisdom. It reminds us that societies can flourish through cooperation and care, that progress can be gentle, and that tranquility can be a defining force in human history. The landscapes of the archipelago continued to guide the unfolding story of these peaceful eras, shaping the identities and rhythms of life for communities whose connection to nature remained central to their worldview. As the Yayoi period matured, the land responded to human activity in ways that reflected both continuity and innovation. Fields stretched across valleys where wetlands had once dominated, and villages settled more permanently along riverbanks, where fresh water supported both agriculture and daily use. Yet even as these landscapes changed, the forests, mountains, and coasts remained essential elements of cultural life, carrying forward the deep Jōmon understanding that humans were only one part of a much larger tapestry of life. In many ways, the heart of Yayoi society lay in its villages, where families worked side by side, sharing knowledge and responsibilities. Each village developed its own character, shaped by local resources, traditions, and the personalities of its leaders. Some communities specialized in metalworking, producing tools and ornaments that traveled far through trade networks. Others were known for their pottery styles, or for their skilled fishermen whose knowledge of tides, currents, and seasonal migrations provided the community with a steady supply of food. These specializations added depth to the cultural mosaic of the era, demonstrating how peaceful cooperation and exchange strengthened both local identity and regional unity. Daily life began before the sun had fully risen, when the air was still cool and quiet. Farmers walked along narrow embankments between flooded rice paddies, inspecting water levels, checking young plants, and ensuring that channels remained clear. Their movements reflected practiced skill, developed through years of working the same fields. As the day progressed, more community members joined in the labor, singing soft melodies that helped set the pace for long hours of work. The rhythmic nature of these tasks encouraged conversation, laughter, and quiet exchanges, reinforcing the social bonds that held the villages together. Meanwhile, artisans began their own work in small workshops built near the center of the village. Metalworkers heated bronze or iron in furnaces powered by charcoal, shaping tools with steady precision. Potters turned clay into smooth vessels, each piece reflecting both functional purpose and artistic sensibility. Basket makers wove reeds and bamboo into containers used for carrying grain, storing food, and transporting goods. These crafts were not merely occupations, but expressions of identity and community pride. Artisans passed their skills to apprentices, ensuring continuity across generations. Children observed these activities with curiosity, often helping with small tasks appropriate to their age. They gathered firewood, brought water to artisans, or collected plants and nuts from the forest edges. Their education was not formal but experiential, rooted in hands-on participation and observation. Elders played an important role in this process, offering guidance through stories, demonstrations, and gentle correction. The wisdom of elders was respected, not only for practical knowledge, but for their understanding of cultural values and traditions rooted in both Jōmon and Yayoi heritage. The concept of harmony extended beyond the community into the natural world. The people believed that spirits inhabited rivers, mountains, trees, and even objects crafted with care. These spirits were not distant deities, but intimately connected to daily life. Before planting rice, villagers performed small rituals to honor the spirit of the fields, offering prayers and symbolic gifts that expressed gratitude and hope. Before felling a tree, they acknowledged the spirit within it, asking for permission and offering thanks. This respectful relationship with nature, inherited from Jōmon ancestors, ensured that the people remained mindful of the impact of their actions. As the centuries passed, villages developed increasingly complex water systems, building networks of canals that extended across valleys. These systems required precise engineering and constant maintenance. Communities organized seasonal labor teams to ensure channels remained open and embankments strong. These collective efforts strengthened unity, as people understood that the success of the harvest depended on cooperation. Even children took part in these activities, learning early that communal responsibilities were essential to survival. Larger regional centers began to emerge, serving as hubs for surrounding villages. These centers included leaders who coordinated trade, organized rituals, and oversaw agricultural planning. Their homes were often more substantial, reflecting their responsibilities rather than personal wealth. They hosted gatherings where representatives from nearby villages discussed shared concerns, exchanged goods, and strengthened alliances. These interactions contributed to the development of regional identities, while still maintaining the peaceful ethos that defined the era. Festivals became increasingly elaborate as society grew more structured. Planting festivals in the spring were joyful occasions filled with music, dance, and communal meals. Drums echoed across the fields, signaling the beginning of a new agricultural cycle. Rituals honored the spirits of the seeds, the soil, and the water, inviting their blessings for a bountiful harvest. During these festivals, people told stories that connected present practices with ancient Jōmon traditions. They spoke of ancestors who had lived in harmony with the land long before the first rice paddies were shaped, reminding everyone that their current prosperity was built upon a foundation of deeply rooted knowledge. Harvest festivals in the autumn brought even greater celebration. After weeks of labor, the fields were transformed into landscapes of golden abundance. Families worked together to gather rice, tying stalks into bundles and carrying them to raised floor granaries. Once the harvest was complete, the entire community gathered to rejoice. They shared food prepared from the new rice, along with fish, vegetables, and preserved nuts that complemented the meal. Music filled the air as people danced, sang, and gave thanks for the generosity of the land. These festivals reinforced the idea that prosperity came not only from hard work, but from the mutual support that defined village life. The peaceful character of the Yayoi world extended to its approach to social hierarchy. While certain individuals held leadership roles, society remained fundamentally cooperative. Leaders acted as caretakers rather than rulers, ensuring that resources were distributed fairly, conflicts were resolved through dialogue, and rituals were properly observed. Their legitimacy depended on their ability to maintain harmony, and communities could withdraw support from leaders who failed to uphold these responsibilities. This balanced structure helped prevent the rise of oppressive authority and preserve the egalitarian spirit inherited from Jōmon culture. Even as metal weapons became more common, their presence did not lead to widespread violence. Instead, they were often used for ceremonies, symbolic displays, or hunting. The emphasis placed on cooperation and shared work made large-scale conflict impractical. Communities understood that peace allowed them to focus on cultivating the land, exchanging goods, and strengthening relationships. In this way, the peaceful worlds of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan stood in contrast to many contemporary societies elsewhere, where warfare played a central role in cultural development. The natural environment offered rich opportunities for reflection and spiritual connection. People often visited sacred sites located on mountain slopes or deep within forests. These places were believed to be closer to the realm of spirits and ancestors, offering guidance to those who sought answers. Pilgrimages to these locations were undertaken with reverence and quiet humility. Individuals carried small offerings such as food, ornaments, or symbolic objects made from natural materials. They sat among ancient trees, listening to the sounds of wind and water, allowing the tranquility of the surroundings to calm their thoughts. The sea, ever present along the coastal regions, also held profound significance. Fishermen understood its rhythms through generations of observation. They launched simple boats carved from logs or constructed from wood planks, navigating the waters with confidence born of experience. Their knowledge of tides, currents, and migratory patterns allowed them to provide the community with a steady supply of fish and shellfish. The coastlines became gathering places where people collected seaweed, shells, and driftwood. These shorelines echoed with the same peaceful atmosphere that defined the fields and forests, reinforcing the theme of harmony that flowed through these ancient societies. As the Yayoi period reached its later stages, the blending of traditions became even more pronounced. Burial mounds grew larger in some regions, reflecting emerging social distinctions, yet they remained rooted in cultural values that emphasized respect for ancestors and community identity. These mounds, often constructed with great care, served as landmarks that connected the living with the dead. People believed that those buried within continued to watch over the land, guiding the growth of crops and protecting the village. Rituals performed at these sites strengthened the connection between generations, ensuring that the memory of ancestors remained alive. The continuity between Jōmon and Yayoi traditions demonstrated how peaceful evolution could shape a society over long spans of time. Rather than abrupt transitions, cultural practices shifted gradually, blending new knowledge with old wisdom. This gentle progression allowed communities to adapt without losing their sense of identity. The peaceful worlds of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan remind us that history can unfold quietly, guided by cooperation, reverence, and a deep understanding of the natural world. As we continue, imagine the cool, damp air of Japan's northern forests during the Jōmon period, thousands of years ago. The Jōmon people, whose name comes from the distinctive cord-marked patterns on their pottery, were hunter-gatherers, yet their lives were far from the fleeting existence we might imagine when we think of such early societies. They had established semi-permanent settlements, often along rivers and coastlines where fish, shellfish, nuts, and wild game were plentiful. Small groups, sometimes numbering a few dozen, would cluster together in pit dwellings, their roofs thatched with reeds or bark, blending seamlessly with the forest around them. Smoke curled gently from hearths at the center of these homes, carrying the aroma of roasted chestnuts and grilled fish, mingling with the earthy scent of moss and fallen leaves. The Jōmon were artists in their daily lives as much as they were practical gatherers and hunters. Every piece of pottery they shaped was both a utilitarian vessel and an object of subtle beauty. The intricate cord patterns pressed into clay were not mere decoration. They reflected a careful attention to texture, symmetry, and the tactile pleasure of holding an object made by one's own hands. Around their homes, they created small figurines, some representing humans, others animals, each one perhaps holding symbolic meaning or used in rituals that connected them to the spirits of the land. These figures, sometimes called dogū, show the Jōmon's deep connection to their surroundings and the spiritual life they nurtured alongside their practical needs. Seasons dictated the rhythm of life. In spring, the forest offered tender shoots and early berries. The Jōmon would take to rivers in simple dugout canoes or wade along the shallows to catch fish and eels. Summer brought the warmth needed to cultivate wild gardens of edible plants, as well as the abundance of insects and small game. By autumn, the forests were heavy with nuts and acorns, which required careful processing to make them edible, a communal task that strengthened bonds among families and neighbors. Winter, cold and long, called for gatherings around hearths, storytelling, and the making of tools and pottery that would carry the community into the next year. Trade and interaction, though modest compared to later periods, were vital to Jōmon life. Shells from the distant coasts, obsidian from inland deposits, and colorful stones carried by rivers were exchanged between settlements, creating a network of connection that wove together the people of the islands. These exchanges were not merely economic, they were social and symbolic, reinforcing alliances and friendships, and perhaps even serving as the beginnings of shared cultural identity across different regions. Over time, subtle shifts began to appear on the islands. By around the first millennium BCE, new forms of tools, new methods of planting rice, and the introduction of wet rice agriculture hinted at the gradual arrival of the Yayoi culture. Unlike the Jōmon, who had thrived on gathering, hunting, and small-scale horticulture, the Yayoi brought with them the skills to transform the land itself. Fields were cleared, irrigation channels dug, and rice paddies, shimmering with water, became a defining feature of the landscape. The very act of cultivating the earth introduced new rhythms and demands to daily life, binding communities more closely to the seasons and the cycles of growth and harvest. Imagine walking through a Yayoi village for the first time. Raised floor buildings, designed to protect grain and foodstuffs from moisture and pests, line the main thoroughfares. Children chase each other along the paths, laughing as they weave between the houses. Smoke from cooking fires rises in gentle spirals, carrying the rich scent of steamed rice and roasted root vegetables. Farmers tend to their fields with careful, repetitive gestures, planting and weeding with patience honed over generations. Life is still deeply connected to nature, but there is a new emphasis on cultivation and storage, a growing understanding of the land's potential to sustain larger communities. Tools made of polished stone and bronze appear alongside the pottery and figurines that continue to echo the Jōmon aesthetic. The Yayoi were not only skilled agriculturists, but also metallurgists and craftsmen, producing ritual objects, weapons, and jewelry that suggest complex social structures and emerging hierarchies. In some areas, burial mounds began to appear, marking the resting places of important individuals and signaling the start of more formalized societal stratification. Yet even with these changes, the overall pace of life could remain gentle, attuned to the slow cycles of planting, growing, and harvesting, of hunting in the nearby forests, and of celebrating seasonal festivals that honored the spirits of the land and ancestors. Waterways remained lifelines just as they had been in Jōmon times. Rivers and streams were avenues for travel, trade, and fishing. Canoes and rafts, carefully maintained, allowed for the movement of goods and people, and in the quiet moments, a lone fisherman might drift downstream, rod in hand, reflecting the harmony of human labor with the natural world. Forests provided wood for tools, construction, and fuel, while wild animals offered protein and fur. The Yayoi learned to manage these resources, introducing small-scale domestication of animals and controlling the flow of water through irrigation, subtly shaping the environment while still living in rhythm with it. Cultural continuity was also present. Many of the religious practices and symbolic objects of the Jōmon persisted into the Yayoi period, though they evolved in form and context. Rituals connected to fertility, harvest, and ancestor worship remained central to community life. Festivals might feature music, dance, and offerings, each act a meditation on the interdependence of humans, animals, and crops, and on the gratitude owed to the natural world that sustained them. Life in these early Japanese societies was an intricate tapestry woven from labor, leisure, spirituality, and art. In some regions, the Yayoi influence gradually absorbed Jōmon practices, resulting in communities that blended traditions. Pottery styles evolved, incorporating both the cord-marked decorations of Jōmon craft and the more functional shapes favored by Yayoi farmers. Villages grew larger, sometimes encompassing several hundred people, and trade networks expanded, allowing for the exchange of not only material goods but also stories, customs, and innovations. These interactions helped to lay the foundations for the complex society that Japan would eventually become. Through all these changes, the landscape itself remained a quiet witness to human life. Mountains, rivers, and forests were not obstacles but companions, shaping settlement patterns, inspiring art, and providing the resources needed for survival. In the gentle sway of reeds along a riverbank, the rustle of leaves in a forest glade, or the sparkle of sunlight on a rice paddy, one can almost feel the same peace and continuity that the Jōmon and Yayoi people experienced thousands of years ago. By exploring the everyday lives of these early communities, one gains a deeper understanding of the beauty of slow, intentional living. There is a lesson in the way they balanced work and rest, community and individuality, human ingenuity and respect for the natural world. Their world was neither hurried nor chaotic. It was deliberate, rhythmic, and deeply connected to the cycles of life that continue to surround us even today. And so, as we sit together, imagining the smoke curling from pit dwellings, the laughter of children in the fields, the quiet labor of planting rice, and the gentle rhythms of the forest, we are transported across millennia to a time when life was both simple and profound. The story of the Jōmon and Yayoi is not only one of survival and adaptation, but also of art, spirituality, and the human desire to create beauty in daily life. Their legacy is quietly present in the landscapes of Japan, in the traditions that endure, and in the understanding that even the simplest lives can be rich with meaning and connection. The Jōmon world was a place of remarkable intimacy with nature. Every footstep through the forest, every dip of a hand into a river, every selection of nut or berry was informed by a profound understanding of the environment. They were keen observers of the changing seasons, of animal behavior, of the cycles of the moon, and the patterns of rainfall. In spring, the first warm winds would stir the forest floor, encouraging the sprouting of wild tubers and edible shoots. Families would venture into the woods together, children learning the names and uses of plants and herbs from their elders. They gathered food not only for sustenance, but as part of a broader relationship with the land, taking care to leave some seeds and roots behind, ensuring the forest would continue to thrive. Fishing was an art as much as a necessity. Along the coasts and rivers, Jōmon people used lines made of twisted plant fibers, hooks carved from bone, and traps woven from reeds. The rhythm of fishing was patient and contemplative. One had to know the habits of each species, the flow of the water, and the subtle shifts in weather that might signal abundance or scarcity. At times, the entire community would gather at estuaries during the spawning runs of fish, working together to collect what nature offered while celebrating the bounty with song, dance, and communal meals. Such moments were not merely practical but deeply social and ritualistic, reinforcing bonds and shared knowledge across generations. In winter, when snow blanketed the mountains and rivers slowed to a quiet stillness, life moved indoors. Pit dwellings, sunken slightly into the earth to conserve warmth, became centers of family and community life. Hearth fires crackled at the center, and the Jōmon gathered together to repair tools, shape pottery, and create ornaments. The tactile process of pressing cords into wet clay, carving patterns into bone, or weaving fibers into ropes and nets was meditative, each movement connecting the maker to tradition, utility, and the natural world. Dogū figurines, often small but intricately shaped, were sometimes kept near the hearth or hidden in storage areas, perhaps serving as talismans of health, fertility, or protection. These objects illustrate not only artistic skill, but also the spiritual imagination of a people deeply attuned to unseen forces in their environment. The Jōmon diet was varied and rich, reflecting the diverse ecosystems of the islands. Acorns, chestnuts, walnuts, and other nuts provided a starchy foundation, while fish, shellfish, deer, boar, and birds offered protein. Wild vegetables, fruits, and edible shoots supplemented these staples, sometimes eaten raw, sometimes roasted over fire. Fermentation and drying were used to preserve foods for leaner months, showcasing a sophisticated understanding of natural preservation techniques. Meals were shared communally, and the act of eating was intertwined with social cohesion, storytelling, and ritual. To watch a Jōmon family at mealtime was to witness a careful orchestration of survival, skill, and subtle artistry. As the Jōmon period gradually transitioned into the Yayoi, subtle yet profound shifts began to reshape the island's human landscape. Around the first millennium BCE, rice agriculture arrived, bringing with it new social structures, new forms of settlement, and new relationships with the land. The Yayoi, thought to have migrated from continental Asia, introduced wet rice cultivation techniques that demanded careful planning, irrigation, and sustained attention over months and seasons. Whereas the Jōmon had relied on the foraging and hunting of naturally available resources, the Yayoi learned to manipulate the environment to ensure a steady yield. Fields were leveled and flooded, dikes built to control water flow, and seedlings carefully transplanted into rows of standing water, creating landscapes that shimmered under sunlight like vast green mirrors. Villages expanded as a result of these agricultural innovations. Unlike the relatively small, scattered Jōmon settlements, Yayoi communities often included hundreds of inhabitants, living in raised floor buildings that elevated their possessions above damp ground and potential pests. Storage pits and granaries became central features, allowing for the accumulation of surplus and the ability to survive years of poor harvests. This shift towards surplus also introduced new dynamics of wealth and status, as families or clans that controlled larger portions of arable land or larger stores of grain naturally accrued influence. Yet even within this evolving society, daily life retained a sense of rhythm and purpose that was intimately connected to the land. The seasonal cycle took on even greater significance in Yayoi life. Spring was a time of preparation, clearing fields and planting seedlings in the flooded paddies. Children often helped, learning the labor that sustained their families while developing dexterity and understanding of growth patterns. Summer brought growth and vigilance. Weeds had to be removed, water levels monitored, and pests kept in check. Autumn, the harvest season, was a time of both intense labor and celebration. Families would gather, carrying baskets of ripe rice to central storage, sharing meals with neighbors, and performing rituals of thanks to the spirits that had guided the crops. Winter was the season of reflection, repair, and planning, when tools were mended, pottery shaped, and stories passed from elders to the young, ensuring that knowledge survived alongside the harvests. Social organization also transformed with the introduction of rice cultivation. Communities developed hierarchies based on land, labor, and control of surplus, giving rise to leaders who coordinated irrigation, defense, and communal projects. While there is little evidence of widespread conflict, these shifts indicate a growing complexity in human relationships. Ritual practices became more formalized, often associated with agricultural cycles, and ceremonies were performed to honor ancestors, ensure fertility of the fields, and maintain harmony with the unseen forces believed to guide natural and human life. Yayoi craftsmanship reflected these changes as well. Bronze and iron were introduced, allowing for the creation of tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects with greater durability and precision. Unlike the earlier stone and bone tools of the Jōmon, metal implements enabled more efficient farming, woodworking, and construction. Yet artistry remained central. Pottery continued to be molded with care, sometimes decorated with geometric patterns or motifs reflecting animals, plants, or spiritual symbolism. Jewelry, often crafted from jade, shell, or bronze, served both as ornamentation and as markers of social identity. The blend of practicality, beauty, and ritual significance remained a hallmark of early Japanese life. Trade networks also expanded during the Yayoi period. Rivers, lakes, and coastal waters became arteries of connection, facilitating the movement of grain, pottery, metals, and luxury items over long distances. Communities were no longer isolated. They were linked by shared knowledge, shared goods, and shared rituals. Interaction between regions allowed for the diffusion of ideas, techniques, and cultural practices, creating a mosaic of localized traditions united by broader patterns of life and belief. Religious and spiritual life remained intertwined with everyday activities. Ancestor worship, belief in protective spirits, and veneration of natural features such as mountains, rivers, and trees continued to guide behavior and decision-making. Small shrines or ritual spaces could be found near homes or in fields, where offerings of food, pottery, or other crafted items were made. These acts of devotion were not merely ceremonial. They reflected a worldview in which humans were part of an interconnected web of life, and success in agriculture, health, and community cohesion depended on maintaining harmony with both the living and the spiritual realms. Even in times of labor and change, there were moments of leisure, reflection, and artistic expression. Music and dance played roles in both ritual and recreation, with flutes, drums, and simple stringed instruments accompanying songs that celebrated the seasons, recounted ancestral deeds, or invoked blessings for crops and families. Storytelling was a central form of education, entertainment, and cultural preservation. Elders would recount tales of heroic hunters, spirits inhabiting forests and rivers, and legendary events that shaped the landscape, blending history and myth into narratives that conveyed both practical knowledge and moral guidance. Daily life in Yayoi villages was remarkably diverse. While farming dominated, families still hunted, fished, and gathered wild foods, maintaining a degree of continuity with Jōmon practices. Children learned survival skills alongside agricultural techniques. Women often managed household production, weaving fibers into clothing and ropes, tending to food preservation, and participating in ritual preparations. Men engaged in farming, woodworking, tool making, and the coordination of communal projects. The division of labor, while evident, was not rigid, and cooperation within and between families underpinned social cohesion and survival. One of the most striking aspects of this era is how the transformation from Jōmon to Yayoi represents not only technological and social evolution, but also a philosophical continuity. Both cultures exhibited profound respect for the natural world, an emphasis on community, and a belief in the unseen forces shaping human life. The difference lay primarily in scale and intensity. The Yayoi learned to harness the land with more deliberate intervention, to store surplus, and to organize larger communities, yet they retained a sense of rhythm and responsiveness to seasonal cycles that characterized the Jōmon way of life. As we imagine traveling through the villages of the Yayoi period, it is easy to see the blending of these worlds. Pit dwellings and raised floor houses coexist, fishing and hunting remain part of subsistence, and pottery styles reflect both the chord-marked patterns of earlier generations and the functional innovations of rice farming communities. Every interaction, whether planting a seed, shaping a vessel, or performing a ritual, is part of a continuum that stretches across centuries, linking human ingenuity with the enduring landscapes of Japan. Imagine a day in a Yayoi village. Morning mist rises from flooded rice paddies, illuminating the delicate shoots that have been carefully transplanted. A child steps barefoot into the muddy field, laughing as the soil squishes between their toes, while an elder watches nearby, offering guidance on spacing and irrigation. In the forest beyond the village, hunters track deer and birds, returning at noon with fresh game to complement the rice harvest. Women prepare meals, grind grains, and mold clay into vessels for cooking and storage. In the evening, the community gathers around fires for stories, music, and ceremonial offerings, celebrating the harmony of work, family, and the natural world. Through these vivid, daily rhythms, one begins to understand the deep continuity of human life in Japan. The Jōmon and Yayoi periods, though separated by centuries and characterized by different technologies and social structures, share a common foundation: a deliberate, thoughtful engagement with the environment, a commitment to community and family, and an enduring sense of beauty and spirituality woven into everyday tasks. In the quiet forests and river valleys of ancient Japan, life unfolded with a rhythm dictated by the seasons, the weather, and the flow of rivers. The Jōmon people moved with attentiveness and precision, guided by generations of observation and practice. They understood the language of the land, the subtle shifts in plant growth, the patterns of animal movement, the timing of fish migrations, and the hidden resources of the forests. Each season brought tasks that were interwoven with social life, spiritual practice, and artistic expression. In early spring, as the snow melted from the higher mountains, rivers swelled with runoff, carrying nutrients that nourished the forest floor. Families emerged from their pit dwellings, gathering edible shoots, tender leaves, and early berries. The children learned the names and qualities of plants, the dangers of certain roots, and the best locations to gather nuts, absorbing knowledge that was essential for survival and cultural continuity. Fishing in rivers and along the coasts was not merely an economic activity, but a central social practice. Nets and traps were carefully woven from plant fibers, hooks were carved from bone or antler, and fishing parties coordinated their efforts to maximize yield while respecting the limitations of the natural environment. The movement of schools of fish, the timing of tides, and the behavior of birds served as indicators for when to fish and where. Occasionally, large community gatherings occurred at estuaries during seasonal spawning runs, where nets stretched across the water, and families and neighbors worked together to gather abundance. These gatherings reinforced social bonds, provided opportunities for storytelling, and often coincided with ritual observances, offering thanks for the bounty and seeking protection for future harvests. Hunting remained vital, with men tracking deer, boar, and smaller game through dense forests and along riverbanks. They observed animal behavior, noting the locations of dens, the movement patterns of herds, and the timing of mating seasons. Weapons included stone-tipped arrows, spears, and traps, all carefully crafted for both efficiency and durability. Hunting was a skill passed down through apprenticeship, with younger members shadowing elders, learning not only techniques, but also the ethical and spiritual considerations of taking life. There was an understanding that animals were more than resources. They were participants in the cycles of life, deserving respect and gratitude. The making of tools and pottery was a central feature of Jōmon daily life. Clay was gathered from riverbanks, carefully kneaded, and shaped into vessels of varying sizes and functions. Cord marking, the distinctive technique for which the Jōmon are named, involved pressing ropes or cords into wet clay, creating patterns that were both decorative and tactily satisfying. Some vessels were designed for cooking or storage, while others held ceremonial significance. Dogū figurines, often depicting human or animal forms, were sometimes buried or placed in special locations, suggesting symbolic or ritual functions. The creation of these objects required patience and skill, and the act of crafting connected individuals to their ancestors, to the land, and to the rhythms of their community. Seasonal changes shaped not only labor but also social and spiritual life. Summer brought growth and abundance, but also challenges, as insects, storms, and animal behavior had to be managed. Communities worked together to maintain dwellings, repair tools, and harvest resources from forests and rivers. Autumn was a time of collection and preservation. Nuts, tubers, fruits, and game were stored for the colder months, and the work of processing these foods was often a communal effort, bringing families together in shared labor. Winter, though harsh, offered opportunities for reflection, creativity, and education. Children learned oral histories, songs, and legends, while elders taught craft techniques and hunting strategies. Hearths became centers of warmth, sustenance, and storytelling, reinforcing cultural continuity. As the Jōmon period drew to a close, new cultural currents began to emerge. The Yayoi people, thought to have arrived from continental Asia, introduced wet rice agriculture and metallurgical technologies that gradually reshaped the island's societies. Rice cultivation transformed both the landscape and human organization. Low-lying river valleys were cleared and leveled, irrigation channels dug to control water flow, and paddies flooded in preparation for seedlings. The act of farming required sustained attention, coordination, and knowledge, leading to more permanent settlements and larger population centers. Villages grew in size, often containing hundreds of residents, and the need for organization fostered social hierarchies based on control of land and labor. The daily life of a Yayoi farmer was defined by cycles of planting, maintenance, and harvest. Spring required the careful preparation of fields, tilling the soil, and transplanting seedlings into the flooded paddies. Children helped with planting, learning the intricate knowledge needed to maintain productive fields. Summer demanded vigilance. Weeds had to be removed, water levels carefully managed, and pests controlled. Autumn brought the harvest, a season of both physical labor and communal celebration. Fields were alive with activity as families collected rice, transported it to granaries, and prepared for winter storage. Surplus harvests allowed some individuals or families to accumulate influence, marking the beginnings of wealth differentiation and social stratification. Craftsmanship evolved alongside agricultural development. Bronze and iron tools improved efficiency in farming, woodworking, and domestic tasks. Polished metal blades, axes, and sickles allowed for faster clearing of land and harvesting of crops. Artisans produced ritual objects, weapons, and decorative items that reflected both function and aesthetic sensibility. Pottery styles evolved to accommodate new agricultural practices, with larger storage jars, durable cooking vessels, and ceremonial pieces featuring geometric motifs and symbolic designs. Jewelry, often carved from jade, shell, or bronze, signaled status and identity, suggesting a growing complexity in social structures. Waterways became vital arteries of communication, trade, and sustenance. Rivers and streams facilitated the transport of goods, linking distant villages and regions. Canoes, rafts, and simple boats allowed communities to exchange rice, pottery, tools, and raw materials, creating networks of interdependence. Trade was not purely economic. It reinforced social bonds, transmitted cultural knowledge, and provided access to rare or valuable materials. Obsidian from mountainous regions, shells from coastal areas, and metals from distant sources moved along these networks, connecting the islands and laying the foundation for regional diversity within a shared cultural framework. The spiritual life of Yayoi communities remained deeply connected to agriculture and natural cycles. Ancestor worship and veneration of spirits associated with mountains, rivers, and forests persisted. Rituals were performed to ensure the fertility of fields, the health of families, and the protection of the community. Seasonal ceremonies marked the beginning and end of planting and harvesting cycles. Offerings of rice, pottery, and crafted objects were made in shrines or special ritual spaces, acknowledging the unseen forces that guided both human and natural life. Music, dance, and storytelling accompanied these rituals, reinforcing social cohesion and cultural continuity. Despite the emergence of new technologies and social structures, elements of Jōmon life persisted. Hunting, fishing, and gathering remained integral to subsistence, providing dietary variety and preserving knowledge of the land. Pottery and craft traditions maintained continuity with earlier practices, blending the chord-marked aesthetics of the Jōmon with the functional designs of Yayoi life. Communities valued cooperation and shared labor, ensuring survival and reinforcing bonds across generations. Children were educated in both practical and spiritual knowledge, absorbing skills that had been honed over centuries. Daily life in Yayoi villages was remarkably balanced. While farming demanded attention and labor, the work was interwoven with periods of rest, creativity, and social interaction. Families shared tasks, supported one another, and maintained networks of cooperation that extended beyond individual households. Festivals and ceremonies punctuated the calendar, providing moments of reflection, gratitude, and celebration. The integration of labor, art, ritual, and community created a world in which human activity was harmonized with the rhythms of the natural environment. The arrival of wet rice agriculture also altered the perception of time and space. The need to plan for planting, irrigation, and harvest created a forward-looking consciousness, encouraging long-term thinking and organization. Fields were mapped, water channels constructed and maintained, and labor coordinated across households. This attention to planning and environmental management foreshadowed the later development of complex societies, while still retaining a fundamental respect for natural processes. Interactions between regions led to a blending of traditions. Jōmon and Yayoi practices coexisted in many areas, creating hybrid cultural forms. Pottery could feature chord-marked designs alongside shapes suited for rice storage. Rituals might combine older animistic practices with ceremonies tied to agricultural cycles. Trade and social networks allowed innovations to spread, yet local identities remained strong, reflecting adaptation to specific landscapes and ecosystems. The island's geography encouraged diversity while also promoting shared knowledge and interconnectedness. Landscapes played a central role in shaping daily life. Mountains provided timber, stone, and game. Rivers offered fish, transport, and fertile soil. Coastal areas yielded shellfish, salt, and trade opportunities. Forests, fields, and waterways were all managed with care, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of ecology. Human settlement patterns followed natural contours, balancing access to resources with protection from environmental hazards. Villages were often sited to take advantage of both river and forest, allowing for diverse subsistence strategies and long-term sustainability. In Jōmon and Yayoi societies, art and symbolism permeated practical life. Pottery, tools, ornaments, and ritual objects were crafted with attention to form, texture, and meaning. Dogū figurines, ceremonial jars, and metal ornaments expressed both aesthetic sensibility and spiritual consciousness. These objects were more than functional. They encoded knowledge, values, and beliefs, serving as tangible connections between generations. The act of creation itself reinforced social bonds, transmitted cultural memory, and provided a sense of continuity amidst the challenges of survival. The transition from Jōmon to Yayoi also illustrates resilience and adaptability. Communities absorbed new technologies, crops, and social forms without abandoning the wisdom of previous generations. Knowledge of hunting, fishing, and gathering persisted alongside rice cultivation. Ritual practices evolved but retained continuity with ancestral traditions. Craftsmanship integrated new materials and techniques while honoring established aesthetics. This blending of innovation and tradition ensured both survival and cultural richness, allowing communities to thrive across changing environments and centuries. The lives of individuals, though often invisible to history, were deeply interconnected with these broader patterns. Children learned survival skills, craft techniques, and spiritual knowledge from parents and elders. Young adults contributed to farming, construction, and communal labor, while gaining an understanding of social organization and responsibilities. Elders guided rituals, shared wisdom, and preserved cultural memory. Women managed domestic production, contributed to agriculture, and participated in ceremonial life, balancing practical and spiritual roles. Each member of the community played a vital part in sustaining the ecosystem of human life, connecting labor, art, and spirituality in daily routines. Rivers, forests, and coastal areas were not merely resources but central characters in the narrative of life. Seasonal floods enriched fields, snowfall shaped mobility, and storms tested human ingenuity. Communities observed and adapted to these forces, developing techniques for water management, shelter construction, and risk mitigation. Stories, songs, and rituals reflected environmental knowledge, ensuring that practical skills were encoded in cultural memory. Life was an ongoing dialogue with nature, emphasizing observation, patience, and respect. As the years passed, the patterns of life among Jōmon and Yayoi communities unfolded with remarkable consistency and rhythm, yet each year brought subtle changes, dictated by the cycles of nature and the necessities of survival. Spring arrived first in the lowlands, when the snow still lingered on distant mountain peaks. It was a time of anticipation and preparation. Villagers emerged from their winter dwellings to inspect fields and clear debris accumulated from autumn storms. Hunters set out to survey the forest for early game, and gatherers searched for the first tender shoots and roots that signaled the renewal of life. Water levels in rivers, swollen by melting snow, dictated travel and fishing patterns. Those who understood the flow of water and the movement of fish had a distinct advantage. And knowledge of these rhythms was passed carefully from elder to younger members of the community. Spring was also a season rich in ritual significance. Both Jōmon and early Yayoi communities performed ceremonies to honor ancestral spirits and to invoke protection over crops and families. Offerings of nuts, seeds, and early harvested roots might be placed in small shrines or at natural landmarks such as large rocks or ancient trees. Music accompanied these rites, whether from simple flutes carved from bamboo or from percussion instruments made of wood and animal hide. Dance was not merely entertainment. It embodied prayers and intentions, conveying gratitude and hope for abundance in the coming months. In this way, daily labor, art, and spirituality were interwoven, creating a tapestry of life that blended the practical with the transcendent. The planting season was a careful orchestration of labor and observation. In Yayoi villages, paddies were flooded with water channeled from nearby streams, and young rice seedlings were transplanted by hand in straight, evenly spaced rows. This method ensured maximum yield and required constant attention. Families worked together, moving rhythmically through the muddy fields, each person performing tasks suited to their skill and experience. Children, learning by imitation, became adept at handling seedlings, understanding the importance of spacing, depth, and water management. This was education embedded within labor, a seamless transmission of practical knowledge that also reinforced social cohesion. While planting was underway, hunters continued their pursuit of game in the surrounding forests. They tracked deer, boar, and smaller mammals, understanding the landscape not only in terms of opportunity, but also in ethical responsibility. Taking an animal for sustenance was always accompanied by a sense of respect, and often rituals were performed to honor the spirit of the creature and ensure balance in the natural world. Traps were checked, snares monitored, and arrows carefully repaired, reflecting an intimate familiarity with materials, tools, and animal behavior. Fishing remained equally sophisticated, with nets and weirs strategically placed to take advantage of seasonal migrations and tidal movements. Families often combined these resources with cultivated crops, ensuring a varied diet and fostering resilience against shortages. Summer brought growth and vigilance. Rice paddies teemed with bright green shoots, forests flourished with leaves and berries, and rivers sparkled under the sun. The warm months demanded constant attention. Irrigation channels had to be cleared of silt, weeds removed from fields, and pests kept at bay. In the forest, the seasonal abundance of insects, small mammals, and fruit required careful collection, and the management of these resources was crucial to the community's survival. Labor was often communal, with extended families working together to maintain fields, process food, and repair dwellings. The cooperative nature of work reinforced social bonds, while shared labor created opportunities for storytelling, music, and the exchange of practical knowledge. The creation and maintenance of tools remained central to daily life. Stone axes, polished to a fine edge, were used to fell trees for building and fuel, while bone and antler implements shaped wood and leather. Pottery, carefully modeled and decorated, was essential not only for cooking and storage but also for ritual purposes. Clay was collected, kneaded, and tempered with sand or crushed stone to enhance durability. Cord-marked patterns persisted in many Jōmon-inspired designs, even as Yayoi pottery adopted smoother, larger forms suited to rice storage. The process of making pottery was deliberate and meditative, reinforcing the connection between human skill, natural materials, and the cultural traditions carried across generations. Communal feasts and gatherings were central to the social fabric. During the summer months, villages often organized celebrations that marked milestones in planting or honored the spirits believed to oversee fertility and growth. Music and dance were integral, with rhythmic drumming and flutes accompanying movement that reflected agricultural cycles, the movements of animals, or the flow of rivers. These festivals allowed families to strengthen alliances, display skill in crafting or performance, and share the abundance provided by the land. Children were active participants, learning songs, dances, and crafts, ensuring that cultural knowledge remained vibrant and continuous. As the warmth of summer waned, attention turned to the harvest. Autumn was a season of intense labor and preparation. Rice paddies were drained, and grains were carefully harvested, threshed, and transported to storage pits or raised granaries. These tasks demanded coordination across households and often involved temporary cooperative arrangements in which families assisted one another to ensure efficiency and completeness. Preservation techniques, such as drying and fermenting, allowed communities to endure the winter months with relative security. Surplus harvests could also be used as a form of trade, extending social networks and creating interdependence between villages. Autumn was equally a time of ritual reflection. Offerings of the first grains, as well as game, fruits, and nuts, were presented in ceremonies designed to honor ancestors and appease local spirits. These rites reinforced social cohesion and maintained a spiritual equilibrium, linking the community's prosperity to the unseen forces believed to influence daily life. Storytelling, often conducted during evening gatherings around hearths, served to educate younger generations about survival, ethics, and cultural values. Myths and legends blended practical lessons with spiritual insight, weaving history, morality, and cosmology into a cohesive narrative framework. Winter introduced a slower, more contemplative rhythm. Snow blanketed the mountains and frozen rivers limited travel. Dwellings became centers of warmth, labor, and social interaction. Pottery was fired in kilns or open pits, tools repaired or fashioned anew, and fibers woven into clothing or ropes. Hunting and gathering continued when possible, but for many, the season emphasized domestic work, education, and ritual observance. Storytelling became central, allowing for the transfer of knowledge, cultural memory, and ancestral wisdom. Dogū figurines and other ritual objects were used in ceremonies, perhaps serving as protective talismans or as representations of spiritual intercession during harsh months. In Yayoi communities, winter also allowed for reflection on agricultural strategies. Villagers reviewed the success of harvests, repaired irrigation channels, and prepared fields for the coming planting season. Leadership, often associated with control of water management, storage, or ceremonial authority, became crucial in coordinating labor and resources. Decision-making was collective to some extent, Yet individuals who demonstrated expertise or accumulated surplus could influence the direction of communal activities. These structures laid the groundwork for increasingly complex social organization, balancing cooperation with hierarchical management. The integration of metal tools during the Yayoi period transformed work and craftsmanship. Bronze and iron tools allowed for more efficient clearing of fields, woodworking, and construction. Axes, hoes, and sickles were sharpened and maintained with meticulous care. Metal ornaments, weapons, and ritual items reflected both utility and aesthetic sensibility, signaling status and skill. Artisans combined inherited Jōmon techniques with new metallurgical knowledge, creating objects that served practical, social, and spiritual purposes. Communities thus maintained continuity with the past while embracing technological innovation. Trade and interaction extended the reach of local communities. Rivers and coastal routes facilitated the movement of goods such as rice, pottery, metal implements, and rare stones. These exchanges were not merely economic but also social and symbolic, reinforcing alliances and spreading ideas. Obsidian, sourced from volcanic regions, traveled long distances, as did shells, jade, and metal objects. The flow of materials was mirrored by the transmission of knowledge, from agricultural techniques to ritual practices, ensuring that innovations could be shared while allowing for local adaptation. Spiritual beliefs remained intertwined with the natural world. Ancestors were revered, local spirits honored, and seasonal festivals performed to ensure harmony between humans and the environment. Shrines were modest but carefully maintained, often situated near dwellings, fields, or natural features deemed sacred. Offerings of rice, game, pottery, or crafted objects were common, and ritual specialists guided ceremonies that marked transitions in agricultural, social, or seasonal cycles. Music, dance, and storytelling complemented these rites, reinforcing the moral and practical lessons embedded within community life. Daily life in both Jōmon and Yayoi societies reflected a balance of labor, creativity, and reflection. Hunting, fishing, and gathering persisted alongside agriculture, ensuring dietary variety and resilience. Craftsmanship integrated utility, aesthetic expression, and ritual function. Social structures, while increasingly complex in Yayoi times, retained a cooperative foundation. Children were educated in practical skills, spiritual knowledge, and cultural traditions through hands-on participation, observation, and storytelling. Communities valued continuity, adaptability, and mutual support, ensuring survival and cultural richness across generations. The landscapes themselves were active participants in daily life. Mountains, rivers, forests, and coastal areas were sources of sustenance, materials, and spiritual inspiration. Seasonal variations shaped labor, ritual, and social interactions. Floods, storms, and changing river courses tested human ingenuity and adaptability, while fertile soils, abundant fish, and diverse flora provided resources for thriving communities. Human settlements were carefully sited to balance access to resources with protection from environmental hazards, and settlement patterns reflected an understanding of both geography and ecology. Art and symbolism pervaded practical life. Pottery, tools, ornaments, and ritual objects encoded knowledge, belief, and identity. Dogū figurines, ceremonial jars, and metal ornaments demonstrated both technical skill and spiritual consciousness. The creation of these objects reinforced social cohesion, transmitted cultural memory, and provided continuity across generations. A vessel might be used for cooking, storage, or ritual offering, embodying multiple layers of significance simultaneously. The act of crafting itself was a form of meditation, a connection to both past and future. Interactions between Jōmon and Yayoi traditions created rich hybrid cultures in many regions. Cord-marked pottery coexisted with smooth rice storage jars. Ritual practices incorporated animistic traditions alongside agricultural ceremonies. Trade, marriage, and communal projects reinforced connections across villages while allowing for local adaptation. The blending of continuity and innovation ensured resilience and cultural vitality, providing a foundation for increasingly complex societies that would continue to evolve over centuries. In these ancient communities, the lives of individuals were inseparable from the broader patterns of community and environment. Children learned by participating in planting, harvesting, hunting, and crafting. Young adults assumed responsibilities within the household and community. Elders guided rituals, preserved memory, and advised on strategy and social matters. Women managed domestic production, contributed to agricultural labor, and played central roles in ceremonial life. Each person's actions were part of a continuum that connected past, present, and future, binding practical work with cultural and spiritual significance. The cyclical nature of life in Jōmon and Yayoi Japan emphasized observation, patience, and respect. Humans were both participants in and stewards of the environment. Survival depended on careful attention to ecological rhythms, skillful management of resources, and cooperation within and between communities. Spiritual and practical knowledge were deeply intertwined, encoded in stories, rituals, and crafted objects. The legacy of these cultures lies not only in archaeological remains, but in the enduring wisdom of harmonious living with the natural world, in the rhythms, skills, and practices that shape daily life for millennia. Life in Jōmon and Yayoi Japan was intricately connected to the subtle rhythms of the natural world, a relationship that shaped not only survival but the very way communities thought about time, space, and social responsibility. The forests surrounding villages were alive with movement, birds flitting between branches, small mammals rustling under leaves, and the occasional glimpse of deer or wild boar in a distant clearing. These creatures were not merely resources but participants in a shared ecosystem, and knowledge of their behaviors informed hunting strategies, seasonal rituals, and even spiritual practice. Hunters understood migration patterns, mating seasons, and feeding habits, and this understanding was passed orally through generations, ensuring that each successive cohort could interpret the environment with the same attentiveness and skill as their ancestors. Gathering food was equally nuanced. Acorns, chestnuts, and walnuts were harvested with care, often collected from multiple locations to ensure both sustainability and quality. Some nuts required processing to remove tannins, a labor-intensive task performed in the cool evenings of spring or autumn. Families worked together, cracking, soaking, and grinding nuts into flour or meal that would supplement fish, game, and cultivated crops. Edible roots, shoots, and early berries were similarly collected in patterns that reflected both seasonal abundance and long-term ecological understanding. These practices cultivated not just physical sustenance, but also an intimate relationship with the land, a sense of timing, and patience that shaped the rhythm of everyday life. Fishing, a critical component of both Jōmon and Yayoi subsistence, involved a sophisticated understanding of waterways. In rivers, streams, and coastal areas, communities deployed nets, traps, and hooks with remarkable precision. The placement of nets depended on currents, the contours of the riverbed, and the behavior of fish schools, while traps were often constructed with knowledge of seasonal movements. Fishing was not only a task but a communal event. Extended families and neighbors often coordinated efforts, sharing both labor and catch. During spawning seasons, rivers teemed with activity as nets stretched across channels, guiding fish into collection points, and celebrations followed successful harvests, combining gratitude, ritual, and social reinforcement. Hunting techniques reflected deep ecological knowledge and intimate craftsmanship. Spears, bows, and arrows were carefully fashioned from bone, antler, and stone, often supplemented with wooden shafts and cords made from plant fibers. Traps were set along game paths or concealed near watering areas, requiring a keen understanding of animal behavior and seasonal patterns. Hunters not only provided meat, but also skins, bones, and sinew, all of which had practical uses in clothing, tools, and ornamentation. The act of hunting was embedded within social and spiritual frameworks, including rituals acknowledging the spirit of the hunted animal and offerings meant to maintain ecological balance. The crafting of tools, pottery, and ritual objects was central to daily life. Clay from riverbanks was mixed with sand or crushed stone to enhance durability, and then shaped into vessels for cooking, storage, or ceremonial purposes. Cord-marked patterns, a signature of Jōmon pottery, persisted even as Yayoi styles emerged with smoother surfaces and larger storage capacities for rice. Dogū figurines, often depicting stylized human forms with exaggerated features, were carefully molded and fired. Some may have represented fertility or protective deities, while others could have been used in healing rituals. The process of crafting was a meditative and social activity, often performed collectively, reinforcing skills, traditions, and social cohesion. As seasons shifted, the rhythm of labor and ritual adapted. Spring brought planting, preparation, and ceremonial offerings of gratitude for new growth. In Yayoi communities, rice seedlings were carefully transplanted into flooded paddies, requiring sustained attention to spacing, depth, and water levels. Families collaborated, each member contributing to ensure success. Summer was a period of vigilance. Irrigation channels needed constant maintenance, weeds threatened crop growth, and pests required management. Hunters and gatherers continued their work in surrounding forests and rivers, supplementing cultivated food with wild resources. Communal celebrations often accompanied labor, blending festivity, ritual, and education, as children observed and participated in the practices that would define their adulthood. Autumn was a season of culmination and reflection. The harvest of rice, nuts, fruits, and game demanded coordination across households, often creating temporary cooperative labor networks. Surplus produce was stored for winter, ensuring security and allowing some families to accumulate social influence. Offerings of first fruits and grains marked ceremonies honoring ancestors, local spirits, and the cycles of life. Evening gatherings around hearths were occasions for storytelling, music, and reflection. Myths recounted the deeds of legendary hunters, spirits inhabiting mountains and rivers, and ancestral acts that shaped the land, blending practical knowledge with moral and spiritual guidance. Winter slowed the external pace but intensified domestic and ritual activity. Pit dwellings were centers of warmth, work, and learning. Pottery was fired, tools repaired, and fibers woven into clothing, nets, and ropes. Hunting and gathering continued where possible, but much attention was directed toward maintenance, education, and ceremonial observance. Elder members of the community instructed younger generations in craft, storytelling, and ritual practice. Dogū figurines and ritual objects were utilized in ceremonies aimed at protection, health, and preparation for the coming planting season. Knowledge was encoded in objects, gestures, and stories, ensuring continuity across generations. Yayoi technological advancements enhanced both survival and social structure. Bronze and iron tools improved efficiency in land clearing, construction, and agriculture. Metal sickles, axes, and hoes allowed for faster planting and harvest, while crafted weapons and ceremonial objects reflected both utility and status. Artisans balanced function with aesthetic expression, producing objects that served practical, ritual, and social roles simultaneously. These innovations facilitated larger settlements, supported surplus production, and contributed to the development of social hierarchies. Trade expanded the interconnectedness of communities. Rivers and coastal routes allowed the exchange of rice, pottery, metal tools, and ornaments. Obsidian from volcanic areas traveled far from its source, and shells, jade, and bronze artifacts circulated widely. Trade reinforced social bonds, spread technological and ritual knowledge, and created interdependencies between distant communities. Objects acquired through exchange often held both practical and symbolic significance, serving as markers of identity, prestige, and connection. Spirituality was deeply entwined with everyday life. Ancestor worship and reverence for local spirits permeated practices, influencing labor, settlement patterns, and rituals. Shrines or designated sacred spaces were maintained near dwellings, fields, and natural landmarks. Offerings included food, crafted items, and other symbolic objects, accompanied by music, dance, and performance. Rituals were synchronized with agricultural and seasonal cycles, reinforcing both communal cohesion and ethical principles embedded in society. Settlement patterns reflected careful attention to environment, resources, and defense. Villages were often located near rivers or fertile lowlands while remaining within reach of forests for hunting and gathering. Pit dwellings, raised floor houses, and communal storage structures balanced protection, efficiency, and social interaction. Spatial organization allowed for coordinated labor, ritual activity, and resource management. The landscape itself shaped cultural practices, with mountains, rivers, and forests influencing mobility, trade, and spiritual understanding. Interactions between Jōmon and Yayoi traditions resulted in hybrid cultural forms. Cord-marked pottery coexisted with smooth, large jars suitable for rice storage. Rituals incorporated animistic practices alongside agricultural ceremonies. Shared labor, trade, and marriage networks facilitated cultural diffusion while preserving local adaptations. Continuity and innovation merged, ensuring resilience in the face of environmental challenges and social evolution. Daily life emphasized integration of labor, craft, and spirituality. Children were educated through participation in planting, harvesting, hunting, and crafting. Young adults assumed responsibilities within households and community projects. Elders guided ritual practice, preserved historical memory, and advised on strategic or social decisions. Women managed domestic production, contributed to agricultural labor, and played central roles in ceremonial life. Each individual's actions connected personal experience to communal well-being, linking survival with ethical, cultural, and spiritual frameworks. Seasonal festivals were a defining feature of social and spiritual life. Planting festivals in spring honored the emergence of new growth, with offerings of seeds, early shoots, and other natural elements. Midsummer ceremonies celebrated fertility, rain, and abundance, often accompanied by music, dance, and ritualized storytelling. Autumn harvest festivals marked the culmination of labor, combining gratitude, feasting, and the reinforcement of social hierarchies. Winter ceremonies focused on protection, health, and preparation, embedding reflection and planning into communal life. These cyclical observances reinforced the integration of work, spirituality, and social organization. Hunting and fishing remained essential, not only for sustenance, but as vehicles for teaching, socialization, and spiritual engagement. Tracking game required knowledge of animal behavior, landscape, and seasonal patterns. Fishing strategies depended on river flow, tides, and fish migrations. Both activities demanded skill, patience, and cooperation, fostering intergenerational learning and ethical considerations regarding human interaction with other species. Crafts continue to play a central role in social and spiritual life. Pottery, textiles, and ornaments served utilitarian purposes while encoding cultural meaning. Dogū figurines, ceremonial vessels, and metal ornaments embodied spiritual beliefs, status, and skill. Creation and use of these objects reinforced communal bonds, transmitted knowledge, and maintained continuity across generations. Even routine objects, such as storage jars or cooking vessels, were often imbued with symbolic significance, reflecting an understanding of material culture as both practical and spiritual. Water management was a defining feature of Yayoi communities. Flooded paddies required careful construction and maintenance of dikes, channels, and levees. Communities coordinated labor to ensure water reached each field at the correct level and timing. Knowledge of hydrology, soil composition, and seasonal variation was essential. Irrigation systems enabled reliable harvests, supported surplus production, and facilitated the growth of larger settlements. Control of water resources also became a basis for social organization and leadership, linking technical expertise with political influence. Trade and inter-village networks extended the reach of communities. Raw materials, tools, and ceremonial objects moved along rivers, coastal routes, and overland paths. Obsidian, jade, shell, and metal circulated widely, linking distant regions culturally and economically. Trade was not merely transactional. It reinforced social bonds, facilitated alliances, and transmitted knowledge. Communities adapted innovations from neighbors, integrating them with local practices while preserving environmental, cultural, and spiritual coherence. The rhythms of life in Jōmon and Yayoi Japan were defined by a delicate balance between human activity and the natural environment. Forests, rivers, mountains, and coasts were not passive backdrops but active participants in daily life, shaping settlement, labor, ritual, and social organization. Communities learned to read subtle signals in the landscape. The swelling of rivers in spring, the flowering of particular plants, the behavior of migratory birds, and the signs of animal movement that indicated the presence of game. Knowledge of these rhythms was essential for survival and was transmitted through generations via practical instruction, storytelling, and ritualized practice. In early spring, families emerged from their winter dwellings to prepare for the year's work. Hunters inspected traps and weapons. Gatherers searched for the first shoots, tubers, and nuts, and farmers began clearing land for planting. The thawing rivers and streams dictated fishing activities, with certain areas targeted for spawning fish and others reserved to preserve stocks. Children were taught to observe carefully, learning to distinguish edible plants from poisonous ones and to track animal signs. This combination of practical knowledge and acute observation fostered a sophisticated ecological understanding, deeply embedded in daily routine. Ritual life reinforced the connection between humans and nature. Offerings of seeds, nuts, and early harvested plants were placed at shrines or natural landmarks, accompanied by song, dance, and invocation. Ceremonies marked transitions in the agricultural calendar, such as the beginning of planting or the emergence of new shoots, and served to honor both ancestors and local spirits. Music and movement were integral, transforming practical labor into acts of devotion and reflection. These observances were not separate from daily life, but interwoven with work, education, and social cohesion. Hunting was a disciplined practice that required patience, knowledge, and physical skill. Jōmon and early Yayoi hunters observed the patterns of deer, wild boar, birds, and small mammals. Weapons, bows, arrows, spears, and traps were carefully crafted from stone, bone, antler, and wood. Each piece reflected not only technical expertise, but also an understanding of materials and the behaviors of the targeted animals. Hunting was socially significant as well, creating opportunities for cooperative labor, teaching younger members essential survival skills, and embedding ethical considerations about the use of natural resources. Rituals often accompanied hunts, expressing respect for the life taken and reinforcing the community's moral and spiritual framework. Fishing was equally sophisticated, involving nets, traps, hooks, and carefully timed strategies. Seasonal migration of fish dictated when and where to fish, and families coordinated efforts to maximize yield while avoiding depletion. Estuaries and river mouths often became sites of communal activity, with multiple households collaborating to collect fish. This cooperation reinforced social bonds, provided occasions for feasting and celebration, and connected daily subsistence activities with spiritual and communal life. Fish were used for food, trade, and ceremonial offerings, emphasizing the multifaceted importance of these aquatic resources. Gathering complemented hunting and fishing, and it required careful planning and ecological knowledge. Acorns, chestnuts, walnuts, tubers, and edible shoots were collected with attention to sustainability, Nuts were often processed in communal settings, soaked and ground into flour or meal to supplement diets dominated by fish and game. Wild plants provided essential nutrition, and knowledge of their medicinal and culinary properties was passed orally across generations. The collection of these resources reinforced communal cooperation, social learning, and cultural continuity. Pottery and crafts were central to both practical and spiritual life. Jōmon cord-marked pottery exemplified the integration of art, function, and ritual. Vessels were shaped for cooking, storage, and ceremonial purposes, often decorated with cord impressions or intricate patterns. Dogū figurines, carefully molded and fired, were used for fertility rituals, health observances, or protection. These objects encoded cultural knowledge, values, and beliefs, serving as tangible links between individuals, families, and the broader community. The act of creating pottery or figurines was meditative and socially reinforcing, embedding craft, observation, and spiritual practice in daily routine. The transition to Yayoi culture introduced wet rice agriculture, which transformed settlement, labor, and social organization. Rice cultivation demanded meticulous planning, irrigation, and sustained attention over months. Low-lying river valleys were cleared and leveled, and paddies were flooded for seedling transplantation. The labor involved required coordinated efforts across households, integrating the work of men, women, and children. The rhythm of life adjusted to accommodate the cycles of planting, maintenance, and harvest, creating new temporal and spatial frameworks within which communities organized themselves. The daily rhythm of a Yayoi village was structured around the needs of rice cultivation. Spring was dedicated to field preparation and transplantation. Families collaborated, with children assisting in planting and learning techniques essential for survival. Summer demanded vigilance. Irrigation channels had to be maintained, weeds removed, and pests controlled. Hunters and gatherers supplemented agricultural produce with protein and micronutrients from forests and rivers. Communal cooperation was essential, and seasonal festivals provided opportunities for education, celebration, and ritual observance, embedding cultural knowledge in lived experience. Autumn brought the harvest, a period of both labor and reflection. Rice, nuts, fruits, and game were collected, processed, and stored. Storage methods, including raised granaries and pits, allowed for surplus accumulation, which could be used for trade or redistributed during communal events. Festivals honored the completion of work, the bounty of the harvest, and the ancestors whose protection was believed to sustain life. Songs, dance, and storytelling accompanied these events, blending practical instruction with cultural and spiritual education. Evening gatherings reinforced social bonds and transmitted historical and moral knowledge, ensuring continuity across generations. Winter, while slower in external activity, intensified domestic labor and ritual practice. Pit dwellings served as centers of warmth, work, and education. Pottery was fired, tools repaired, and fibers woven into textiles, nets, and ropes. Hunting and fishing continued where possible, and ritual observances focused on protection, health, and preparation for the coming year. Elders instructed the young in craft, storytelling, and ethical principles, embedding communal memory and cultural identity in tangible and experiential forms. Dogū figurines and ceremonial objects were central to winter rites, serving as mediators between humans, ancestors, and spiritual forces. The introduction of metal tools in Yayoi communities enhanced labor efficiency and social differentiation. Bronze and iron axes, hoes, and sickles allowed for faster clearing of land, improved cultivation, and more efficient harvests. Metal ornaments, weapons, and ceremonial objects reflected both functional and symbolic significance, marking status and skill. Artisans blended inherited Jōmon techniques with new metallurgical knowledge, creating objects that were simultaneously utilitarian, decorative, and ritualized. These advancements facilitated larger settlements, surplus production, and the development of emerging hierarchies. Trade networks expanded across regions, utilizing rivers, coastal routes, and overland paths. Obsidian from volcanic areas, jade, shells, and bronze artifacts circulated widely, linking distant communities. Trade was not purely economic. It transmitted technological knowledge, ritual practices, and cultural norms. Communities adapted innovations while preserving local environmental, spiritual, and social integrity. Exchange strengthened alliances and reinforced social cohesion, creating networks of interdependence that extended the influence of individual villages. Spiritual life remained intimately connected to the environment and agricultural cycles. Ancestor worship, veneration of local spirits, and seasonal ceremonies were central. Shrines and sacred spaces were maintained near dwellings, fields, and natural landmarks. Offerings of rice, fish, and crafted items were presented in ritual observances accompanied by music, dance, and performance. Festivals and rites were synchronized with planting, growth, and harvest cycles, reinforcing communal cohesion, ethical values, and ecological understanding. Settlements were carefully designed to balance resource access, protection, and communal functionality. Pit dwellings, raised floor houses, storage structures, and communal spaces were strategically arranged to maximize efficiency and social integration. Villages were sited near fertile land, water sources, and forested areas, allowing for diverse subsistence strategies. Spatial organization facilitated coordinated labor, ritual activity, and social hierarchy, reflecting sophisticated environmental and social planning. The hybridization of Jōmon and Yayoi traditions produced rich cultural forms. Cord-marked pottery persisted alongside rice storage vessels, and animistic rituals were integrated with agricultural ceremonies. Shared labor, intermarriage, and trade facilitated cultural exchange while maintaining local distinctiveness. This blending of continuity and innovation ensured adaptability and resilience, allowing communities to respond to environmental challenges, demographic growth, and technological change without losing cultural cohesion. Children learned through participation in daily life, absorbing skills and cultural knowledge through observation, imitation, and instruction. They assisted in planting, harvesting, crafting, and ritual, internalizing ethical frameworks, ecological understanding, and social norms. Young adults assumed responsibilities within households and communal projects, reinforcing cooperation, leadership, and cultural continuity. Elders guided decision-making, ritual practice, and historical memory, ensuring that knowledge, values, and tradition persisted. Seasonal festivals were integral to social and spiritual life. Planting ceremonies celebrated renewal, invoking protection and fertility. Midsummer festivals marked growth and abundance, while autumn harvest festivals recognized labor completed, surplus secured, and spiritual harmony maintained. Winter observances focused on protection, health, and preparation for the coming agricultural cycle. Music, dance, and performance were essential components, integrating aesthetic experience with practical and spiritual learning. Festivals reinforced communal identity and embedded ethical, ecological, and practical knowledge in cultural practice. Craftsmanship remained a core feature of life, combining utility, artistry, and ritual. Pottery, textiles, and ornaments reflected technical skill and spiritual consciousness. Dogū figurines, ceremonial vessels, and metal ornaments conveyed symbolic meaning, encoded cultural knowledge, and reinforced social bonds. Even mundane objects carried aesthetic and spiritual significance, demonstrating that in these societies, utility, beauty, and belief were inseparable. The creation of objects was a shared activity that strengthened community cohesion, transmitted skills, and nurtured identity. Water management in Yayoi communities required knowledge, coordination, and foresight. Flooded rice paddies depended on dikes, channels, and levees, carefully maintained through communal labor. Irrigation ensured consistent water supply, supported agricultural surplus, and fostered social organization. Expertise in water management became a source of authority, linking technical skill to leadership, while reinforcing communal responsibility and cooperation. The relationship between people and water exemplified broader ecological consciousness, combining practical necessity with social and spiritual significance. The villages of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan were living ecosystems in which human activity, natural rhythms, and cultural practices were intertwined. Each settlement, whether nestled along a river valley, perched near a fertile coastal plain, or situated at the edge of a dense forest, was carefully adapted to its surroundings. Pit dwellings, raised floor granaries, storage pits, and communal spaces were positioned to maximize access to water, arable land, and forest resources while offering protection from seasonal storms and flooding. Villages were not static. They expanded, contracted, and relocated in response to environmental changes, resource availability, and social dynamics. Every decision about settlement was embedded in both practical necessity and cultural understanding, reflecting a sophisticated integration of ecological knowledge, social organization, and spiritual insight. In early spring, as snowmelt swelled rivers and streams, the rhythms of labor and ritual returned. Families emerged from the shelter of winter, inspecting dwellings for damage, repairing roofs, and preparing hearths for communal cooking. Hunters scouted the forest for early signs of game, tracks in the soft soil, broken branches, or droppings that indicated movement. They understood the timing of mating seasons, the feeding patterns of deer and boar, and the best locations to trap smaller mammals. Each generation of hunters inherited this knowledge through apprenticeship, observation, and storytelling, learning not only practical skills, but also ethical frameworks that guided their interaction with wildlife. To take an animal was never considered a purely utilitarian act. It was embedded in respect, ritual acknowledgement, and gratitude, ensuring the delicate balance between humans and the ecosystems they depended upon. Gathering complemented hunting, and Jōmon and Yayoi people were skilled in the sustainable collection of plant resources. Acorns, chestnuts, walnuts, tubers, and wild roots were harvested carefully, often from multiple locations to prevent depletion. Acorns required soaking or leaching to remove bitter tannins, a process conducted communally during spring evenings or early summer afternoons. Young children participated, learning to distinguish edible species from toxic ones, gaining tactile knowledge of textures and shapes, and developing an intimate understanding of the landscape. These activities reinforced community cooperation, ecological awareness, and intergenerational continuity, embedding cultural values into everyday survival practices. Fishing was a vital pursuit that combined technology, observation, and cooperation. Families and neighbors coordinated the construction and placement of nets, weirs, and traps, strategically positioned to catch fish migrating upriver or along the coast. Fishing practices were attuned to lunar cycles, tides, and seasonal runs, reflecting a nuanced understanding of aquatic ecosystems. Some fish were preserved through drying, smoking, or fermenting, allowing communities to store protein for months. Fishing also provided opportunities for social cohesion. Shared labor, the exchange of surplus, and communal celebrations following abundant catches integrated subsistence, culture, and ritual. Pottery and crafts reflected both utility and cultural identity. Jōmon cord-marked pottery was aesthetically intricate yet functional, used for cooking, storage, and ceremonial purposes. Dogū figurines, representing human and sometimes animal forms, were crafted with deliberate exaggerations of features, possibly for fertility, protection, or healing rituals. The act of creating these objects demanded skill, patience, and cultural knowledge, linking artisan, material, and community. Pottery and crafted items were more than tools. They encoded histories, beliefs, and ethical principles, serving as tangible markers of cultural memory. The introduction of wet rice agriculture during the Yayoi period transformed not only subsistence but social organization and landscape management. Rice cultivation required meticulous planning, water management, and labor coordination. Villagers cleared low-lying fields, dug irrigation channels, and prepared paddies for transplantation. Each family contributed with men, women, and children engaged in planting, maintaining, and harvesting crops. This labor-intensive system necessitated collaboration and fostered communal identity. The rhythmic cycle of rice agriculture shaped daily life: spring preparation, summer maintenance, autumn harvest, and winter reflection. These cycles embedded temporal awareness, planning skills, and environmental literacy into social practice. Water management was central to Yayoi agriculture. Channels, dikes, and levees had to be maintained, ensuring adequate irrigation without overflooding. Expertise in hydrology and soil management became a source of authority within villages, linking technical skill to leadership. Communities coordinated labor for the maintenance of communal water systems, and rituals often accompanied this work to ensure both technical success and spiritual protection. Water, therefore, was simultaneously a practical necessity, a social organizer, and a spiritual symbol, illustrating the intertwined nature of material and cultural life. Seasonal changes dictated labor, subsistence, and ritual activities. Spring was marked by planting, field preparation, and early hunts. Summer demanded vigilance over crops, water systems, and forest resources. Autumn was harvest and storage. Winter emphasized repair, domestic craft, education, and ritual observance. Within these cycles, daily life blended work, play, ritual, and education. Children learned skills through observation and participation. Young adults assumed responsibilities within households and community projects, and elders maintained cultural memory through storytelling, ritual, and guidance. Women managed domestic production, assisted in agriculture, and played central roles in ceremonial observance. Every member of the community contributed to the balance of survival, knowledge, and cultural continuity. Trade extended the reach of communities, linking villages through rivers, coastal routes, and overland paths. Obsidian, jade, shell, and metal artifacts circulated widely, connecting distant regions culturally and economically. Trade was not merely transactional. It facilitated the diffusion of technology, ritual practice, and social norms. Communities adapted innovations while maintaining local traditions, balancing continuity with change. Exchange reinforced alliances, created interdependence, and allowed cultural innovations to propagate while respecting ecological and social constraints. Spiritual practice permeated daily life. Ancestor worship, veneration of local spirits, and seasonal rituals structured social norms, ethical behavior, and ecological responsibility. Shrines and sacred spaces were situated near dwellings, fields, and significant natural features. Offerings included rice, fish, crafted items, or other symbolic goods, accompanied by music, dance, and storytelling. Rituals were embedded in agricultural cycles and communal activities, reinforcing social cohesion, ethical frameworks, and environmental knowledge. Festivals, in particular, integrated practical labor with spiritual reflection, serving as both celebration and instruction. Village social structure reflected both cooperation and emerging hierarchies. Leadership often centered on control of water management, surplus production, and ritual authority. Families and households collaborated in labor, while individuals with specialized skills, craftsmanship, hunting expertise, or ritual knowledge gained influence. Social bonds were reinforced through shared labor, marriage alliances, and communal participation in festivals and ceremonies. While hierarchy existed, cooperation remained essential to survival, creating a balance between authority and communal responsibility. Hunting and gathering, despite the rise of agriculture, remained integral. Seasonal knowledge ensured sustainable use of forests and rivers, while hunting skills were vital for protein and material resources. Ritual observance accompanied these activities, emphasizing ethical engagement with the environment. Fishing strategies continued to be refined, adapting to seasonal migration and tidal patterns. Both practices embedded ecological literacy into cultural life, ensuring resilience alongside agricultural dependence. Artistic and symbolic production persisted, blending Jōmon traditions with Yayoi innovations. Cord-marked pottery coexisted with smooth, larger vessels for rice storage. Dogū figurines were augmented with metal and new forms reflecting evolving spiritual concepts. Craft production served multiple purposes: utilitarian, aesthetic, ritual, and social. It reinforced communal identity, transmitted knowledge, and reflected intergenerational continuity. Even everyday objects were invested with cultural meaning, demonstrating the inseparability of practical, aesthetic, and spiritual life. Education was experiential and communal. Children learned through participation in planting, harvesting, crafting, and ritual. Storytelling transmitted ethical, ecological, and historical knowledge, embedding learning within entertainment and reflection. Adolescents assumed increasing responsibilities, gaining mastery of craft, subsistence, and social practice. Elders guided rituals, mediated conflicts, and maintained cultural continuity, serving as repositories of knowledge and moral authority. Women managed domestic work, contributed to agriculture, and ensured continuity of ritual practice, balancing productive and symbolic labor. The environment itself shaped culture and social practice. Mountains provided timber, stone, and game. Rivers offered fish, transportation, and fertile soil. Coastal areas yielded shellfish, salt, and trade opportunities. Seasonal changes demanded adaptability. Floods, storms, and droughts tested engineering, ecological literacy, and social coordination. Human settlement and activity reflected a deep understanding of environmental rhythms, demonstrating sophisticated planning and ecological integration. Seasonal festivals and ritual observances punctuated life, reinforcing social cohesion and spiritual awareness. Spring planting ceremonies celebrated renewal, invoking protection and fertility. Summer festivals marked abundance, growth, and social bonds. Autumn harvest festivals honored labor and ancestral support while reinforcing hierarchies. Winter rituals focused on protection, health, and preparation for planting. Music, dance, and storytelling were central, integrating ethical instruction, ecological knowledge, and communal identity. Festivals combined practical outcomes with symbolic significance, bridging labor, spirituality, and celebration. Craft and artistry were deeply embedded in everyday life. Pottery, textiles, metalwork, and dogū figurines expressed technical skill, aesthetic sense, and spiritual consciousness. Objects encoded knowledge, reflected status, and transmitted cultural values. The act of creating objects reinforced community bonds, ensured intergenerational continuity, and cultivated identity. Even functional items carried symbolic meaning, emphasizing the integration of practical and cultural life. Water management was a defining feature of Yayoi civilization. Irrigation channels, dikes, and levees ensured productive rice fields. Communities coordinated labor for construction and maintenance, linking technical skill with social organization. Knowledge of hydrology, soil, and seasonal variation was critical. Leadership often emerged from expertise in water management, highlighting the integration of practical knowledge, social hierarchy, and communal responsibility. Water was simultaneously practical, social, and spiritual, reinforcing human-environment interconnectedness. The blending of Jōmon and Yayoi traditions created rich hybrid cultures. Cord-marked pottery coexisted with large rice storage vessels. Animistic rituals were integrated with agricultural ceremonies. Trade, marriage, and communal cooperation facilitated cultural diffusion while preserving local adaptation. Continuity and innovation merged, allowing resilience in the face of demographic growth, technological change, and environmental fluctuation. Communities maintained both cultural memory and flexibility, ensuring long-term survival. As we reflect on the intricate tapestry of life in Jōmon and Yayoi Japan, we begin to see a world where humans were profoundly connected to their environment, their communities, and their traditions. Life was not a series of isolated tasks, but a continuous flow in which hunting, gathering, and farming were interwoven with art, craft, and ritual. Each season brought its own challenges and celebrations, shaping rhythms of work, learning, and reflection. Communities thrived through cooperation, skillful resource management, and a deep understanding of natural cycles, while innovations like rice cultivation and metalworking allowed societies to grow, trade, and develop increasingly complex social structures. The people of these eras were artists, farmers, hunters, and storytellers, their lives a delicate balance of practicality and spirituality. Ceremonies and festivals marked transitions in the year, ensuring that the cycles of life were acknowledged and honored, while craftsmanship and trade connected villages across regions. Knowledge was passed from one generation to the next not through books, but through lived experience, observation, and storytelling. The dogū figurines, cord-marked pottery, and rice-filled granaries left behind are not just archaeological artifacts. They are echoes of a world where human creativity, community, and respect for nature shaped every aspect of life. In essence, the Jōmon and Yayoi periods remind us of the profound ways in which culture, environment, and human ingenuity intersect. They offer a vision of a world that is peaceful yet dynamic, deeply rooted in respect for both people and nature, and rich with the textures of everyday life. By studying these societies, we gain insights into resilience, innovation, and the enduring importance of community and cultural continuity. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the peaceful worlds of Jōmon and Yayoi Japan. I hope you found it both fascinating and relaxing, and that it inspired a deeper appreciation for the rhythms of ancient life. Be sure to subscribe for more long history videos, where we continue to explore the rich tapestry of human history in immersive, detailed narratives. Your support helps bring these stories to life, and I look forward to sharing even more journeys into the past with you in the future.